Tonight, we're examining every faction in the Dance of the Dragons. This is one of those topics with more beneath the surface, but I'll keep the tone calm so you can relax into the story. Thank you to those of you who've been joining us consistently. If you're falling asleep with us tonight, let me know in the comments how many nights in a row you've been here. And if this is your first night, just comment night 1. Now back to the video. The first great fault line opened years before a sword was drawn, when the lords of Westeros bent the knee to Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen and swore to honor her as King Viserys I's chosen heir. She was still young, the only surviving child of the king's first marriage, and her claim appeared settled by the will of the man seated upon the Iron Throne. Yet Westeros had never been entirely comfortable with the idea of a ruling queen. The customs carried south by the Andals favored sons over daughters, and old expectations have a quiet way of surviving even when kings issue new commands. When Viserys later married Alicent Hightower and fathered sons, the promise made to Rhaenyra began to look less like a final answer and more like the beginning of a long argument. Rhaenyra's supporters became known as the Blacks. Their name came from the colors she wore, black and red, the colors of House Targaryen. At their center stood Rhaenyra herself, Princess of Dragonstone, her claim resting upon her father's repeated declaration that she was his heir. For the Blacks, the matter was simple in principle. The king had chosen, the realm had sworn. A promise, once made before dragon lords and great houses alike, could not simply be set aside because a younger male claimant had been born. Dragonstone was the natural heart of this cause. It was the ancient Targaryen stronghold, a smoking island of black stone in the narrow sea, and the traditional seat of the heir to the Iron Throne. From there, Rhaenyra possessed not only the symbol of succession, but a family network bound to dragons, marriage, and blood. Her most essential allies were the Velaryons of Driftmark. House Velaryon shared the old Valyrian heritage of the Targaryens, and under Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, it had become perhaps the wealthiest and most powerful naval house in the Seven Kingdoms. Their fleets could command the waters around Blackwater Bay. Their marriages tied them tightly to Rhaenyra's family, and their support gave the Blacks something more enduring than courtly approval: ships, sailors, ports, and access to the sea. The Greens took their name from Queen Alicent. At a grand tournament celebrating the 5th anniversary of her marriage to Viserys, Alicent appeared in green, the color that would become the banner of her political household. Across the field, Rhaenyra wore the black and red of her own house. What began as a courtly distinction soon became a language everyone understood. The Queen's party became the Greens. The Princess's party became the Blacks. The Greens supported Aegon, Alicent's eldest son by Viserys. Their argument was grounded not in a forgotten oath, but in inheritance, as much of Westeros understood it. Aegon was male, born of the king, and descended directly from the ruling line. To green eyes, no earlier declaration could overturn the ordinary order by which sons came before daughters. Rhaenyra might have been named heir when Viserys had no sons, but once Aegon existed, they believed the realm had its natural king. Alicent was the emotional center of the Greens, a queen who had watched the court divide around her children for years. Her father, Sir Otto Hightower, supplied the colder political instinct. As Hand of the King, Otto understood councils, offices, marriage pacts, and the value of controlling the room in which royal decisions were made. Even when he was dismissed from office, the Hightower influence remained deeply rooted in the capital. When he returned as Hand, the Greens gained their most experienced organizer. Their strength lay in King's Landing itself. The Red Keep, the Royal Treasury, the City Watch, and the small council were not abstract prizes. They were the machinery of rule. A king could be proclaimed in a distant castle, but whoever held the capital could send ravens, summon lords, distribute offices, and present their claim to the realm as the lawful order of things. House Hightower also brought the immense influence of Oldtown. From the Hightower, their reach extended through merchants, maesters, septons, and ancient alliances. The faith of the Seven did not march as a single army for either side, but its values and traditions gave the green argument a familiar shape. A son inheriting before a daughter was not merely convenient politics. To many, it felt like the way the world was meant to work. Between these two camps stood houses that could not remain undecided forever. The Strongs were especially tangled in the crisis, their family holding offices on both sides of the growing divide. Other lords waited, listened, and calculated. Some remembered their oaths to Rhaenyra. Some saw advantage in Aegon's claim. Some had old grudges, disputed borders, or marriage ties that mattered more than any theory of succession. When Viserys died in the year 129, after the conquest, the silence around the succession lasted only as long as it took for each side to act. In King's Landing, the Greens crowned Aegon II. On Dragonstone, the Blacks gathered around Rhaenyra. One family had produced 2 monarchs, 2 courts, and 2 visions of lawful rule. Above them all waited the dragons, magnificent and terrible, belonging to no cause until their riders chose one. The question that broke the Targaryen dynasty was deceptively simple. Could a daughter inherit the Iron Throne when a son was available to take it? King Viserys I had answered yes, and the lords of Westeros had sworn to uphold his choice. But a king's choice does not always survive the king. Viserys had named Rhaenyra his heir in 105 after the conquest. When the succession was thrown into uncertainty by the death of his son, he had summoned lords from across the realm to Dragonstone and commanded them to swear fealty to her as Princess of Dragonstone. They did. The great hall of the ancient fortress filled with kneeling lords, their swords laid at the feet of a girl of 8. The Iron Throne had never accepted a woman as its ruler, but the king had spoken, and the realm had obeyed. Yet years passed. The king remarried. Sons were born to the new queen. The lords who had sworn to the daughter began to look at the sons and wonder if their oaths could be set aside. The court itself divided, not yet into violence, but into 2 camps, each watching the other. The promise made to the princess had not been forgotten, but it was being questioned by those who believed a son should always come before a daughter. The dance of the dragons began as a question of succession. Could a king name his daughter, bypassing tradition? Could a queen maneuver her son onto a throne promised to another? These were questions of law and lineage, debated in council chambers and solar towers. But the questions did not stay confined to ink and parchment. They spread into the training yards, where squires and knights chose their sides. They spread into the bedrooms of royal princes, where family bonds turned into suspicion. They spread into the skies, where dragons met for the first time, not in unity, but in war. The question of succession consumed the royal family entirely. It turned the Targaryens against one another, pitting father against daughter in spirit, brother against brother, uncle against nephew. In the end, the royal family lost more than a throne. It lost its cohesion, its trust, and its future. When Viserys died in the 129th year after the conquest, the silence in the Red Keep was short-lived. The Greens moved with purpose, crowning Aegon II in the Dragon Pit, before the city fully understood what had happened. The crown they used was the Conqueror's own crown, the circlet of ruby and gold. On Dragonstone, Rhaenyra was crowned in turn. She wore her father's crown, the simpler coronet of Viserys I. The realm now had 2 centers, 2 courts, 2 would-be monarchs. The division was not merely political, it was a tearing of the realm itself, a fracture that ran through every great house in Westeros. For 100 years, the dragons of House Targaryen had been the symbols of its power, the living emblems of the dynasty's divine right to rule. They were ridden by princes and princesses, paraded before crowds, and imprinted on the coins of the realm. They were not, yet, weapons aimed at other Targaryens. The dance changed that. Riders who had grown up together, who had shared feasts and flights and family, now chose sides. The bond between dragon and rider became a bond to a cause of war. Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, who had belonged to King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, would soon taste battle again. Syrax, Rhaenyra's golden she-dragon, would be called to war. The unity of the Targaryen house, symbolized so perfectly by the paired dragons on their banners, shattered into a sky filled with fire. The dragons did not start the war, but they would ensure there was no turning back from it. As the ravens flew from both capitals, the great houses of Westeros faced their own impossible choices. The Vale remembered the blood of the Queen. The North remembered its oaths. The Riverlands found itself torn between neighbors. The Stormlands listened to promises and warnings. Every lord who had a dragon, a daughter, a debt, or a grievance now had to decide which ruler would receive their loyalty. The succession crisis had become a war that soaked the world in dragonfire, and the choices of the great lords would determine who lived to see its end. Some houses declared quickly, others delayed, hoping the war might pass them by, but there was no safety in hesitation. A lord who waited too long could be branded a traitor by both sides, and a castle that refused one army might soon face the other. The first blows came not from vast armies meeting beneath banners, but from bloodshed within the royal family. Prince Lucerys Velaryon flew to Storm's End carrying his mother's message, seeking the support of Lord Boros Baratheon. There he found Prince Aemond already waiting, with an offer from the Greens and old hatred burning in his heart. Lucerys was a boy, his dragon Arax young and small. Aemond rode Vhagar, the oldest and greatest dragon alive, a creature who had once carried Visenya Targaryen herself. What happened above Shipbreaker Bay changed everything. The princes took to the stormy sky, and when they returned, only one dragon came back. Lucerys Velaryon was dead. Whether Aemond meant to kill him mattered little to those left behind. A son had been slain by his own uncle. The war was no longer a contest of claims, councils, and crowns. It had become a war of vengeance. Rhaenyra received news of her son's death on Dragonstone, and grief hardened into fury. The Black Court demanded justice. Across the narrow sea of wind and waves, Daemon Targaryen answered with a promise that would haunt both factions. An eye had been taken, he said, and a son would answer for it. From that moment, every hope of peace began to vanish. The dragons rose, armies gathered. The realm that had once feared the fire of House Targaryen would soon learn what happened when that fire was turned inward. But Rhaenyra was not the first woman in Targaryen history considered for the throne. Before Rhaenyra's claim, the Great Council of 101 chooses Viserys over his cousin Rhaenys. This was the gathering of 1,000 lords at Harrenhal, convened by the aging King Jaehaerys I to settle a succession crisis he could no longer outlive. His sons were dead. His eldest son Aemon had left a daughter, Rhaenys. His second son Balon had left a son, Viserys. The question seemed simple on its surface, but its answer would echo for generations. The decision favors a male claimant over a woman with a stronger line of descent. Rhaenys was the child of the firstborn son. By strict primogeniture, her claim was technically stronger than her cousin Viserys, who was a generation removed. But the lords of Westeros voted overwhelmingly for the man. They chose the familiar stability of a male ruler over the unprecedented nature of a ruling queen. They passed over Rhaenys, and by extension, they passed over her son Laenor Velaryon. The Velaryons, the most powerful house in the Narrow Sea, felt the sting of this rejection deeply. The sea snake, Corlys Velaryon, would never forget that his wife and his son were cast aside because of the mere accident of their gender. Many lords later cite this council as proof that the Iron Throne should pass through men. They did not pass a formal law, but they created a tradition, a precedent, an unspoken understanding that the throne of the conqueror would not be occupied by a woman. This was the standard they felt they had set. It was a standard that Rhaenys herself accepted, at least publicly, stepping back to live a life of comfortable exile at Driftmark. But the precedent written at Harrenhal was a fragile one. It was established by vote, not by absolute decree. It was a precedent of convenience, not a law of succession. And this frail foundation is what Viserys I inherited. Viserys inherits peace, wealth, and a dangerous expectation he will eventually challenge. He was crowned with the immense support of the realm. His reign was prosperous, a golden summer built on the foundations laid by the old king. The treasury was full, the borders were quiet, but he carried the burden of an expectation that he would continue the male line. He knew the lords had chosen him for a single specific reason. They wanted a king, not a queen. They wanted continuity. Viserys was not a natural warrior or a political schemer. He was a man who preferred peace and comfort. He wanted everyone to be happy. He did not set out to challenge the precedent. He did not seek to burn it down. He simply wanted to name his daughter his heir after the loss of his wife and his firstborn son. And in doing so, he placed his love for his daughter directly in opposition to the will of the great lords of the realm. This contradiction, the tension between a father's choice for his heir and the realm's stubborn tradition, is the exact seed from which the Dance of the Dragons grew. The Great Council of 101 was supposed to settle the succession for good. Instead, it created the fault line that would split the House of the Dragon. Viserys lacked the strength or the will to formally overturn the precedent, and he lacked the heart to abandon his daughter. In the heart of the Red Keep, the consequences of this unresolved tension began to take their shape. A queen grew anxious for her sons, a hand grew ambitious for his bloodline, and a princess grew defiant in her claim. The factions were not yet declared, but the lines were already being drawn in the sand of the succession. Viserys had made Rhaenyra the realm's delight when she was still young, presenting her before the assembled lords and receiving their oaths of fealty. One by one, they bent the knee and swore that she would succeed him. At that moment, the king believed he had solved the problem. His daughter was his chosen heir. The lords had accepted her. The question of succession appeared settled. But oaths are strongest when the person who demands them is alive, powerful, and watching. As the years passed, the court changed around Rhaenyra. Her mother was gone. Her father remarried. His new queen, Alicent Hightower, gave Viserys the sons the realm had expected him to produce. First came Aegon, then Aemond, then Daemon. Suddenly, the king had not merely a named heir, but a living male alternative standing within his own household. To Viserys, this did not change anything. Rhaenyra remained his heir because he said she did. He saw no reason to choose between his daughter and his sons. He loved them all, and he believed his word could preserve peace among them. Yet every birth in the royal nursery gave the opponents of Rhaenyra another reason to doubt her future. Aegon was the king's eldest son. In the eyes of many lords, that fact carried more weight than every oath they had once spoken. They remembered Harrenhal. They remembered that the realm had already chosen a male cousin over a female heir. If Viserys himself had a son, how could a daughter possibly remain ahead of him? The answer was that Viserys had never revoked Rhaenyra's designation, but the king's answer was never enough for those who believed custom mattered more than royal preference. They began to gather around Queen Alicent and her father, Otto Hightower. Otto understood the danger better than anyone. His daughter's children would be vulnerable if Rhaenyra inherited, and his own influence would fade the moment a new queen took the throne. So the court divided quietly. There were those who continued to support Rhaenyra, especially House Velaryon, whose blood would soon be tied to hers through marriage. And there were those who looked to Alicent's sons, arguing that no kingdom could safely pass to a woman when a healthy male prince stood ready to rule. These were not simply arguments about law. They were arguments about fear, power, memory, and opportunity. Every lord who chose a side imagined a different future for his own house. A queen might reward one family. A king might reward another. The succession became a contest long before Viserys died, because everyone understood that the crown would not pass quietly when the time came. And at the center of it all stood Rhaenyra, raised from childhood to believe the throne was hers by her father's command. She had been made heir in public. She had received the oaths. She had spent her life being told that she would one day rule. To surrender that claim because her father later had sons would have meant accepting that every promise made to her was meaningless. That was the tragedy of Viserys. He believed love could hold together what politics had already begun to tear apart. He could name Rhaenyra his heir. He could refuse to disinherit her. But he could not force the realm to forget what happened at Harrenhal. The Great Council of 101 AC had spoken. The Iron Throne, by overwhelming decree, would not pass to a woman. Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, saw her claim shattered by the lords who preferred the stability of a male heir. They chose Viserys, and that choice, forged in precedent, was the very thing that King Viserys himself would one day defy, for he had a daughter. Rhaenyra was Viserys's only surviving child from his first marriage to Queen Aemma Arryn. Queen Aemma had suffered greatly in her duty to the realm, enduring a string of miscarriages and stillbirths. A son, Balon, was born, but lived only a single day. The child who survived, the child who thrived, was Rhaenyra. She was the proof of the union, the living legacy of Viserys's beloved Aemma. Aemma's death, bleeding out in the birthing bed of the Red Keep, left a permanent wound on the king. Refusing to name his brother Daemon as his immediate successor, Viserys looked instead to his daughter. After Aemma's death, Viserys publicly proclaims Rhaenyra Princess of Dragonstone and his heir. He summoned the full court, the lords of the Seven Kingdoms, to witness. In a break with every tradition observed at the Great Council, he raised his daughter up as the first official female heir in Targaryen history. Lords across Westeros kneel and swear to defend her right of succession. They came from every corner of the realm: Lord Stark of Winterfell, Lord Arryn of the Eyrie, Lord Baratheon of Storm's End. They placed their hands between the small hands of the 7-year-old princess and swore before the Iron Throne to uphold her claim against any rival, against any brother, against anyone. The oaths were binding, witnessed by the maesters and sealed by the gods. For a time, the young princess is celebrated as the realm's delight. The court was charmed. Rhaenyra was sharp, confident, and fearless. She flew her dragon Syrax with a natural grace that awed onlookers. The small folk cheered her in the streets of King's Landing. Songs were written of her beauty and her spirit. Her father kept her close, training her in the arts of statecraft, allowing her to sit on the small council, letting the realm grow accustomed to the idea of a ruling queen. But a court built entirely on the will of one grieving king is a fragile thing. Viserys, ever the dutiful king, remarried. He chose Alicent Hightower, the daughter of his hand, and with this new queen came new sons: Aegon, Aemond, Daemon. Every son born to Alicent was a living contradiction to the oath the lords had sworn to Rhaenyra. Whispers began in the shadows of the castle corridors. The precedent of 101 AC had not been forgotten. The small council chambers, once filled with voices loyal only to the princess, grew quieter. A party began to form, a queen's party, patient and patient, watching the king age and the children grow. The golden girl of the realm was no longer alone. The game was shifting. Otto Hightower understood the danger better than anyone. As Hand of the King, he had watched Viserys choose love over custom, memory over law. But Otto also saw what the king refused to see. So long as Rhaenyra remained heir, while Alicent's sons lived, the realm possessed two answers to the same question. And when a king dies, two answers can become two armies. Alicent herself became increasingly convinced that her children would never be safe beneath Rhaenyra's rule. Whether that fear was born from ambition, maternal instinct, or the poison of those whispering in her ear, it hardened into certainty. Her eldest son, Aegon, possessed what Rhaenyra did not. He was male, he was the king's eldest son, and to many lords, that was enough. Viserys would not bend. Again and again, he affirmed Rhaenyra's place as his chosen heir. He dismissed Otto from the office of Hand when the conflict between their households became too plain. He arranged marriages, held feasts, and demanded peace from his family. Yet every attempt to bind the rival branches together only revealed how deeply divided they had become. Rhaenyra married Sir Laenor Velaryon, the son of Rhaenys Targaryen, and Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake. It was a powerful match. Laenor was heir to Driftmark, and through Rhaenys, he carried the blood of the very woman passed over by the Great Council. Their union seemed capable of joining the competing claims of two great Targaryen lines. But it brought new whispers. Rhaenyra bore 3 sons, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey. Officially, they were the children of Laenor Velaryon, yet their brown hair, broad features, and close resemblance to Sir Harwin Strong gave their enemies a weapon they would never put down. Alicent's supporters called the boys bastards behind closed doors, then increasingly in public. Rhaenyra's supporters insisted they were true-born princes, as the king himself declared them to be. In Westeros, blood was power, and the question of whose blood ran through those boys became a question of who would one day sit the Iron Throne. Then came another marriage, one even more dangerous. After Laenor's death, Rhaenyra married her uncle, Daemon Targaryen. Daemon was fierce, brilliant, cruel when crossed, and utterly devoted to the power of House Targaryen. With him at her side, Rhaenyra gained not merely a husband, but a seasoned warrior, a dragon rider, and a man willing to do what Viserys never could: confront the enemies gathering around the throne. Together, Rhaenyra and Daemon had children of their own, Aegon the Younger and Viserys. Their existence strengthened Rhaenyra's line, but also made the future succession more tangled. On one side stood the king's named heir and her sons. On the other stood Queen Alicent's sons, each carrying the name Targaryen and the claim of male descent. The court eventually gave these factions names. Rhaenyra's followers wore black, the colour associated with her dress at a tournament years before. Alicent's supporters wore green, the colour she chose to announce herself as a rival power within the royal family. Blacks and greens. At first they were simply courtly labels. Soon they would become banners under which men killed and died. Still, King Viserys lived, and while he lived, no one dared openly challenge his decree. His health failed, his body weakened, and much of the realm drifted beyond his grasp. Yet he continued to speak Rhaenyra's name as heir. He never replaced her. He never declared Aegon his successor. In his mind, the matter had been settled long ago, before the assembled lords of the realm. But kings do not rule from beyond the grave. When Viserys finally died, the moment every faction had prepared for arrived. The question was no longer whether Rhaenyra had been named heir. Everyone knew she had. The question was whether the oaths sworn to a little girl years before were stronger than fear, ambition, tradition, and the desire of powerful men to place a king upon the throne. Viserys had named Rhaenyra his heir. The lords of Westeros had knelt and sworn to her. But a kingdom held together by oaths is a fragile thing, especially when the king who demanded those oaths was still young enough to remarry and father sons. The very night Rhaenyra was named Princess of Dragonstone, the small council began to plan the king's future. He needed sons. He needed a new queen. The realm required stability, and stability meant a male heir. The woman they chose was Alicent Hightower. She was the daughter of the Hand of the King, Otto Hightower, before she was the formidable queen we know from the histories. Alicent was a girl of the Reach, raised in the shadow of the High Tower in Oldtown. Oldtown is the oldest city in Westeros, a centre of faith and learning that shapes its children in very specific ways. To understand Alicent Hightower, you have to look at where she came from. The city of Oldtown is unlike any other in Westeros. It is built on the shores of the Whispering Sound, and it is dominated by the High Tower, a fortress of black stone that has stood for thousands of years. At its base lies the Starry Sept, the former seat of the Faith of the Seven, and the citadel where the maesters are trained. Alicent grew up in this environment. Every stone of her childhood spoke of permanence, of order, of the slow accumulation of knowledge and power across millennia. The Hightowers are not a warlike house. They do not need to be. Their power comes from the flow of information, from their control over the faith, and from their almost unimaginable wealth. This background defined her. She was raised amid the political power of the Faith of the Seven and the ancient influence of House Hightower, a family so old they trace their lineage back to the first men. The Hightowers built their power not just on wealth, but on knowledge and piety. Alicent was bookish, devout, and deeply aware of duty and tradition. She stepped into her role as queen with a solemnity that surprised no one who knew her well. She understood process, she understood precedent, and she understood that the throne was not just a chair, but a symbol of order that must be defended at all costs. For Otto Hightower, this marriage was the culmination of a lifetime of patient ambition. Otto was a subtle man. He had risen to become Hand of the King, not through great victories in battle, but through careful planning and an unshakable demeanour. When Queen Aemma died, Otto saw his opportunity. He was not cruel. He did not hate Rhaenyra, but he believed, deeply and sincerely, that a woman on the throne would lead to war. The precedent of the Great Council of 101 AC was clear to him. The Lords of Westeros would never truly accept a queen regnant. By placing his daughter on the throne, he believed he was not just advancing his own house, but saving the realm from a succession crisis. The wedding gave Otto a direct path back into the very centre of royal power, not just as the Hand, but as the grandfather of the future king. He had watched Viserys' first wife, Aemma Arryn, die before she could provide a surviving son. Now the future of the dynasty rested on his own daughter. The court was polite, the wedding was grand, but behind every smile, a single question began to take root. Rhaenyra had been named heir when it seemed no true-born son would ever sit the throne again. But as Alicent grew heavy with the king's child, the realm watched with held breath. Would Rhaenyra's place survive the birth of sons? When Queen Alicent gave birth to a son, the entire court shifted. The babe was named Aegon, a name of great power in the Targaryen dynasty. It was the name of the conqueror himself. The king was overjoyed. He finally had his son, and Rhaenyra too was happy for her father. But the smiles in the Red Keep were not all genuine. The lords who had sworn oaths to Rhaenyra began to reassess their positions. A king's word is law. But the succession of the Iron Throne has always been a matter of contested traditions. The Lords of Westeros followed the Andal custom of male preference primogeniture. Viserys had tried to set that custom aside for his daughter, but now a healthy son existed. The question was no longer theoretical. It was a living, breathing child with a dragon's name and a queen's bloodline. Princess Rhaenyra had brothers now. First Aegon, then Aemon, then Daemon. Each one was a living challenge to her claim. The court continued to smile at the princess, but behind closed doors, the question spread. The lords who had sworn oaths to Rhaenyra had done so under a specific assumption that she was the only path. Now there were other paths. The Greens had their claim, and they were not afraid to let it sit in the silence of the throne room. It was around the 5th anniversary of the king and queen's marriage that the factions first took on a visible form. A grand tournament was held in King's Landing. On the first day of the event, Queen Alicent arrived in a gown of deep green, the colour of the Hightower sigil. Across the stands, Princess Rhaenyra wore the black and red of House Targaryen. The court took note. The knights who wore the Queen's favour were called the Queen's Party. Those who wore the Princess's favour were called the Princess's Party. It was a public declaration of the divide that had been growing in private for years. The realm was now watching the two courts, measuring their strength, deciding which side to join. For years, the court of Viserys Targaryen managed to maintain its balance. The king insisted that the succession was settled. Rhaenyra was his heir. Aegon was simply his son, not his heir. But words do not have the power to stop the slow political drift of a court. The Queen's apartments became a gathering place for those who favoured tradition. The princess's household on Dragonstone became a gathering place for those who favoured the king's explicit decree. The two women who had once been friends, who had grown up together in the Red Keep, began to drift apart. It was not a sudden break, but a slow, sad separation, driven by the roles they were forced to play. Alicent was no longer just a companion, she was the queen. And Rhaenyra was no longer just a friend, she was a rival. One cannot overlook the nature of the throne itself in this equation. The Iron Throne is said to cut those who sit upon it if they are unworthy. Viserys was a good man, but he was a conflict-avoidant king. He tried to please everyone. He told Alicent that Rhaenyra would be queen. He told Rhaenyra that her brothers would serve her. He never made the difficult choice to formally disinherit Aegon or to publicly reaffirm Rhaenyra's position with the same vigour he did in private. That lack of clarity was a poison that seeped into every corner of his court. The Greens took his silence as acceptance of their cause. The Blacks took his silence as fear of confrontation. Both were, in their own way, correct. For a time, King Viserys kept the peace. He insisted his daughter remain his heir. But the king's word, however absolute in theory, cannot control the ambitions of a royal family divided against itself. The dance had not yet begun, but the musicians were taking their places. The two great factions of the civil war were being born in the quiet corridors of the Red Keep. On one side, the Greens, named for the Queen's gowns, gathered around tradition and the strong faith of Oldtown. On the other, the Blacks, who swore their oaths to the Princess of Dragonstone and the old Velaryon ways. The realm settled into a long, uneasy peace, a prelude to a storm that everyone could feel building on the horizon. After the remarriage of King Viserys to Alicent Hightower, the royal family began to grow in ways that would reshape the future of the realm. Alicent gave Viserys a son, Prince Aegon, a name that echoed through Targaryen history. She later bore Aemond, Helaena and Daemon, each child a new piece on the board of court politics. By long-standing custom, many believed that a king's eldest son should naturally take precedence over his eldest daughter. The Great Council of 101 AC had reinforced this idea, and even though Viserys had benefited from that precedent, he had chosen to break it by naming Rhaenyra his heir, now with sons born of his second marriage. That choice was tested daily, yet Viserys refused to alter his decree. He continued to insist that Rhaenyra remained his heir, the Princess of Dragonstone and the future queen. He would not yield to the expectations of tradition or the pressure from those around him. But the royal household now contained two branches with incompatible futures. Rhaenyra's claim was firm, but Aegon's existence presented an alternative. The realm would eventually have to choose, and that choice would tear it apart. The seeds of the Greens and Blacks were sown in these early years, as the court became a stage for competing ambitions and loyalties. Otto Hightower understood the danger before most others dared to name it. As Hand of the King, he saw that a peaceful succession depended not only on Viserys' wishes, but on what the great lords would accept when the king was gone. To Otto, a male prince offered certainty. Aegon was of the king's blood. He was a dragon rider, and he could be presented as the continuation of a familiar order. Rhaenyra, by contrast, represented a break with every expectation that had shaped the inheritance of the Iron Throne. Alicent gradually came to share her father's fears. At first, she had been close to Rhaenyra, but their friendship could not survive the pressures of the crown. Every declaration in support of Rhaenyra seemed, to Alicent, like a threat to her own children. If Rhaenyra became queen, what would prevent her from viewing Aegon and his brothers as rivals who could never safely be allowed to live? In the brutal history of Westeros, royal blood had often brought danger rather than protection. The divide between the two women became impossible to hide. Their supporters began to gather around them, choosing colours that would later give the factions their names. Those who defended Rhaenyra came to be known as the Blacks, while those who favoured Alicent and her children became the Greens. At this stage, no armies had marched and no dragons had gone to war. Still, the language of friendship had been replaced by suspicion, and every feast, hunt, and family gathering became another opportunity for insult or maneuvering. The conflict deepened when Rhaenyra's reputation came under scrutiny. Questions arose about her conduct and about the legitimacy of her children, with Lyonor Velaryon. Her sons, Jaehaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, were officially recognised as Velaryons, heirs to both Dragonstone and Driftmark through their parents. But many at court noticed that the boys did not resemble Lyonor in appearance. They had brown hair and features that led their enemies to whisper that their true father was Sir Harwin Strong. These whispers were more than cruel gossip. If Rhaenyra's sons were illegitimate, then their claim to inherit after her could be challenged. Alicent's children would stand to gain everything from such a scandal, yet Viserys would not hear it. He insisted that the boys were his grandsons, and threatened punishment against anyone who questioned their birth. His refusal to confront the rumours did not end them. It merely drove the dispute deeper into the heart of the royal family. Sir Criston Cole also became a fierce opponent of Rhaenyra. Once her sworn protector and trusted companion, he had become one of Alicent's strongest allies. His bitterness gave the Greens a formidable champion within the Kingsguard, while Rhaenyra increasingly relied upon the loyalty of House Velaryon and the power of its vast fleet. Lord Corlys Velaryon had his own ambitions, and, though the questions surrounding his grandsons were impossible to ignore, the future of his house remained tied to Rhaenyra's cause. Viserys tried repeatedly to bind the divided family together through marriage. Rhaenyra was eventually wed to Laenor, joining the Targaryen and Velaryon lines. Later, he ordered that Rhaenyra's eldest son, Viserys, would one day marry Helena, Alicent's only daughter. It was an attempt to unite the competing claims before they could become a disaster. Alicent rejected the proposal. She had no desire to see her daughter married into a line she believed was built on a lie. The king's declining health made the crisis more urgent. As Viserys grew weaker, those around him gained greater influence. Alicent and Otto held increasing power in the Red Keep, while Rhaenyra spent more time away from court. The princess eventually moved her household to Dragonstone, taking her children and her supporters with her. This physical separation reflected the political reality. The royal family was no longer one household. It had become two rival courts, each preparing for a future the other could not accept. Then came a series of deaths and marriages that made the struggle even more dangerous. Sir Laenor died under mysterious circumstances, leaving Rhaenyra a widow. Soon afterward, she married her uncle, Prince Daemon Targaryen. Daemon had long been one of the most unpredictable figures in the realm. He was brave, ruthless, and deeply tied to the old traditions of Dragonlord power. By taking Rhaenyra as his wife, he became the father of her future children and the most powerful military figure on her side. Their marriage gave Rhaenyra new strength, but it also terrified her enemies. Daemon was not a man the Greens could easily dismiss or control. Together, he and Rhaenyra represented a union of two branches of the Targaryen dynasty, supported by dragons, wealth, and powerful allies. They later had sons of their own, Aegon and Viserys, adding still more claimants to an already crowded line of succession. The dispute reached a bitter turning point at Driftmark during the funeral of Rhaenyra Velaryon. Her death brought the divided family together under the same roof, but grief quickly gave way to violence. That night, Aemon Targaryen claimed Vhagar, the oldest and largest living dragon. Vhagar had once belonged to Rhaenyra, and Aemon's decision to ride her gave him a weapon unlike any other in the realm. The other children confronted him, and the quarrel became a savage fight. Lucerys cut Aemon across the face, taking his eye. In return, Aemon gained Vhagar, and he never forgot the price he had paid. The injury marked him for life, while the insult he endured became a source of cold, enduring hatred. From that moment onward, the feud between the children was no longer merely inherited from their parents. It had become personal. When the adults gathered to judge what had happened, Viserys once again tried to preserve peace through denial and command. He demanded to know who had called Rhaenyra's sons bastards, treating the spoken accusation as a greater offence than the violence that had cost Aemon his eye. Alicent, furious that her son had been maimed, seized the king's dagger and tried to strike Lucerys herself. Rhaenyra was wounded in the struggle, and the sight of royal blood spilled by royal hands revealed how close the family had come to open war. For a time, Viserys managed to keep the conflict contained, but he could not make the rival claims disappear. He could not force Alicent to trust Rhaenyra, nor could he force Rhaenyra to believe that Alicent's children meant her no harm. Every year that passed gave both sides more dragons, more heirs, and more reasons to fear what would happen upon the king's death. By the end of Viserys' reign, the question was no longer whether the succession would be disputed. The question was who would move first when the throne became empty. The Blacks believed the king's word was law, and that Rhaenyra had publicly named heir before the lords of the realm. The Greens believed that Aegon, as the king's eldest surviving son, possessed the stronger claim by custom, tradition, and the expectations of Westerosi society. The fragile peace of the royal household depended entirely on Viserys remaining alive. Once he was gone, promises would be tested, oaths would be broken, and dragons would be called to war. The birth of Prince Aegon gave the court a question it could not ignore. Who was the true heir? For years that question stayed in the shadows, whispered in alcoves and council chambers. But a question cannot remain hidden forever. It demands an answer. And on the 5th anniversary of the King and Queen's wedding, that answer arrived in the form of a tournament. A grand tourney was held in the yard of the Red Keep. It honoured the royal marriage, a celebration of dynasty and union. But in the year 111 after the conquest, this tournament became something else entirely. It became the first battlefield of a war that had not yet been declared. The first blow was struck without a sword. Queen Alicent arrived at the tourney grounds, dressed in a gown of deep, vivid green, the traditional colour of House Hightower. Green is the colour of Oldtown, the ancient seat of her family and the faith of the Seven. Alicent was not simply honouring her birthhouse. She was displaying a standard. She was making a public statement that her circle, her party, stood apart from the crown. She was a Hightower first, and she was challenging the court to notice. And the court did notice. Across the viewing stands, Princess Rhaenyra and her supporters appeared in a defiant display of black and red, the colours of House Targaryen, the colours of the dragon. It was a direct answer to the Queen's challenge, a vivid assertion that Rhaenyra was the blood of the conquerors, the rightful heir by her father's decree. The colours of the two claimants faced each other across the tourney field, and everyone understood the meaning. The court, always quick to interpret the signs, gave these rival circles their lasting names. The Queen's party and the Princess's party. What had once been a single royal family was now visibly divided. The split was no longer a private tension. It was an open fracture. What began as pageantry became the first public sign that the royal family had already split. The knights jousted, the crowds cheered, the king smiled from his throne. But the truth was in the colours, green and black. The lines were drawn. The war of words and whispers was over. The war of symbols had begun. The tournament did not start the war, but it ended the peace of the court. From that day forward, choosing a side was an act of public declaration. King Viserys, seated between his wife and his daughter, watched the chivalry unfold. But the real contest was happening beside him. The realm was beginning to choose, and the bonds of blood were about to be tested by the weight of the crown. Upon the knights who rode that day was Sir Criston Cole, the skilled young warrior from the Dornish marches who had already earned the admiration of Princess Rhaenyra. He wore the favour she had given him and fought beneath her gaze. In the list, he unhorsed challengers of far greater name and status. Then Aeschyst, Prince Daemon Targaryen, the king's brother, a man famous for his pride, his temper, and his skill with a blade, Daemon had arrived in the colours of his house, eager to remind the court that he too possessed the blood of the dragon. But Criston defeated him before the watching lords and ladies of the realm. It was a humiliation for the prince and a triumph for the princess. Rhaenyra's champion had overcome the most dangerous man in her family. The cheers that followed carried more meaning than any victory in a joust should have held. Criston Cole became a symbol of the princess's strength. He was no great lord with ancient lands and thousands of sworn swords. He was the son of a steward, yet his courage and ability had raised him into the heart of the royal court. For Rhaenyra, he was proof that loyalty could be earned. For Alicent and her allies, he was another weapon placed in the hands of their rival. But the tournament also revealed how fragile the king's authority had become. Viserys still insisted that Rhaenyra was his chosen heir. He had made the lords of Westeros swear to honour her claim. He had repeated his decision in private and in public. Yet every celebration of his family seemed to create another opportunity for the court to question that choice. The king had a son now. Aegon was young, but he was male, and to many nobles that fact outweighed every oath they had once made. Tradition had taught the realm that sons came before daughters. The great council at Harrenhal had chosen Viserys over Princess Rhaenys for the same reason. If the lords had favoured a male cousin over a female heir then, why would they accept a princess over a prince now? Viserys refused to see the comparison. To him, Rhaenyra was not merely a candidate selected by lords. She was his daughter. She was the child of Aemma Arryn, the queen he had loved and lost. Naming her heir had been both a political decision and a promise. To replace her with Aegon would mean admitting that promise had never mattered. Alicent saw the matter differently. She had watched her father, Otto Hightower, fall from the king's favour. She had watched Daemon return to court, always unpredictable and always close to the throne, and she understood that Rhaenyra's accession would place her own children in danger. A new ruler rarely forgave those with a stronger claim, or those who could become the centre of rebellion. That fear would shape every choice Alicent made from that day onward. She was no longer simply the king's dutiful queen or Rhaenyra's former companion. She was the mother of a prince. Her duty, as she understood it, was to secure the future of Aegon, Helaena, Aemond and Daemon. The green gown was not a passing insult. It was the beginning of a cause. Rhaenyra, meanwhile, could not retreat. Every smile from the queen's party, every whisper about Aegon, every lord who praised the young prince too warmly was a challenge to her birthright. She had been named heir before the assembled lords of the realm. If that decree could be set aside because she was a woman, then no oath in Westeros meant anything at all. So the two factions grew stronger. The Greens gathered around Queen Alicent, the Hightowers, Sir Criston Cole, and those who believed the king's eldest son should inherit. The Blacks stood with Princess Rhaenyra, House Velaryon, Prince Daemon, and those who believed the king's word was law. Neither side yet raised banners. Neither side called for war, but each side counted friends, remembered slights, and waited for the moment when patience would no longer be enough. The tournament ended, as all tournaments do. The pavilions came down. The knights departed. The crowds returned to their homes with stories of broken lances and famous victories. But the colours remained in memory. Green for the queen, black for the princess. In the years to come, those colours would fly above castles, armies and battlefields, and men who had cheered politely from the stands would be forced to decide which banner they would follow. The tournament, held in the 111th year after Aegon's conquest, was meant to be a celebration, a commemoration of 5 years of marriage between the king and his new queen. But it became a stage for a declaration of war. When Queen Alicent appeared in a gown of deep green, the traditional colour of House Hightower, it was a direct challenge to the black and red worn by Princess Rhaenyra's party. The realm took notice. The division in King Viserys' court became an open wound. The Greens of King's Landing were no longer a private council whispering in the shadows. They were a visible faction, and they were ready. The Greens were a coalition, but their heart was the royal nursery. Queen Alicent had given King Viserys 4 children, Aegon, Aemond, Helena and Daemon. These children were the future of the dynasty, and their mother was determined to secure that future against the claim of her stepdaughter. The Greens gathered around Queen Alicent, her father Otto, and the claim of Aegon II. This was not merely a mother defending her child. It was a calculated political machine built on the foundations of the most powerful family south of the Neck. House Hightower of Oldtown brought with it the wealth of a trading empire, the influence of the Citadel, and the moral authority of the Faith of the Seven. They presented themselves not as conspirators, but as defenders of the realm's deepest traditions. And at the core of this defense was a singular legal argument, a doctrine that they believed was unassailable. Their central argument is simple. A king's eldest son should inherit before his daughter. This was the law of the Andals, the custom that had governed the succession of every noble house in Westeros for thousands of years. It was the very principle affirmed by the Great Council of 101, when the lords of the realm passed over Princess Rhaenys and her son Laenor to crown Viserys himself. To the Greens, King Viserys had broken this sacred covenant when he named Rhaenyra his heir after the death of Queen Aemma. The birth of Prince Aegon, they argued, should have immediately and automatically superseded that declaration. A king's word could not overturn the fundamental laws of inheritance that protected every lord in the realm. To accept Rhaenyra was to invite chaos. To ensure this argument became reality, the Greens needed to be the ones in the room when decisions were made, and they achieved exactly that. They controlled the machinery of court, the royal household, and much of the small council. Otto Hightower, the Queen's father, was the hand of the king, the second most powerful man in the realm. Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, was a man whose loyalty to Alicent bordered on devotion. Lord Jasper Wild, the Master of Laws, was a staunch Green. The Grand Maester, Orwyle, was a creature of Oldtown, appointed with the Hightower's blessing. Every whisper in the throne room, every raven dispatched from the rookery, every guard rotation at the door of the king's own bedchamber was dictated by the Queen's party. They shielded King Viserys from the world as his health declined, and in doing so, they shielded the capital from the truth of their own ambitions. This political control was the foundation of their entire strategy. The Greens understood something that their rivals often forgot. Raw power alone cannot hold the 7 kingdoms. Their greatest strength is not dragonfire, but preparation inside the capital. While the Blacks could boast of dragon riders, like Daemon Targaryen on Caraxes, and the sheer number of mounts claimed by Rhaenyra's growing family, the Greens had spent a decade fortifying their position within the walls of King's Landing. They had secured the loyalty of the City Watch, the Gold Cloaks, numbering 2,000 men who patrolled the streets. They had cultivated allies among the lords of the Crownlands. They controlled the treasury, which meant they could pay for armies, hire sellswords, and bribe enemies. Wars are not won solely on battlefields. They are won in counting houses, in council chambers, and in the hearts of the small folk. When the time came to act, the Greens did not need to launch a conquest of the capital. They were already standing guard inside its walls. Of course, this was still House Targaryen, and the Greens were not defenseless in the air. Aegon II rode Sunfire, a magnificent golden-scaled dragon, often called the most beautiful beast in the known world. His brother Aemond, fierce and calculating, eventually claimed Vargar, the she-dragon of Queen Visenya, a living weapon of mass destruction and the largest dragon alive. Their sister Helena rode Dreamfire, a pale blue queen with ancient strength and a gentle heart, and the youngest brother, Prince Daemon, fostered in Oldtown far from the intrigues of the capital, bonded with Tessarion, the Blue Queen. These dragons were a potent threat, but the Greens were wise enough to know that a war fought entirely on Dragonback would leave the kingdom a burned ruin. The dragons were a shield, not a sword, in their initial plan. At the head of this faction stood Queen Alicent herself. She was a woman caught between her faith and her ambition. Though she would never have called it ambition, she saw it as duty. She had been raised in the septs of Oldtown, taught that order and tradition were the walls against chaos. The chaos of Rhaenyra's rule, her broken marriage, her illegitimate children. For Alicent, this was not a political argument. It was a moral imperative. The realm could not survive a queen who flouted every sacred law. She was willing to be the villain in Rhaenyra's story, to be the hero in her own. Beside her stood her father, Otto, the architect of the Green strategy. He had waited years for this moment, patiently stacking the board in his favour. He was not a kingmaker, he was a king's maker. Together, they presented Aegon, not as a usurper, but as the rightful king reclaiming the crown that should never have been denied him. The plan they created was meticulous. Upon the death of King Viserys, they would move with absolute secrecy. They would crown Aegon in the dragon pit. Before Rhaenyra could even receive word, they would present the realm with a fait accompli, sending ravens to every lord calling for their allegiance. They held the capital, the treasury, the king's law, and the king's justice. They gambled that Rhaenyra, isolated on the bleak island fortress of Dragonstone, would see the impossibility of her position and yield. If she did not, the Greens were ready. They had the men, the gold, and the preparation. They had seized the centre of the game. But across the Blackwater Bay, the game was far from over. On the ancient Valyrian fortress of Dragonstone, the woman who had been named heir for more than 20 years was watching the horizon. Rhaenyra Targaryen had her own court. She had her own children, her own dragons, and a circle of fiercely loyal supporters who shared her blood. While the Greens fortified their walls and polished their legal claims, a shadow was growing in the east. The Greens had seized the throne, but they had not yet won the war. In the shadow of the Dragonmont, the Blacks of Dragonstone were preparing their own fire. The Greens had their queen, their king in waiting, but the architect of their entire strategy was the hand of the king, Otto Hightower. He had served the realm for decades, under the old king and his successor, and he understood the brutal machinery of power better than any man alive. He did not see the succession as a simple disagreement over legal traditions or a clash of tempers. He saw it as a stark, unyielding matter of survival. If Rhaenyra ever took the throne, her position would be forever threatened by the very existence of Alicent's sons. They were the king's true-born boys, raised in the light of the court. Every disgruntled lord, every ambitious knight would look at Aegon the Elder and see a better alternative, a banter rally behind. Rhaenyra could not afford to let that threat live. Whether she wanted peace or not, she would have to act against them, their blood on the crown. It was the brutal logic of monarchy. Otto understood this with a quiet certainty. He did not frame the conflict as naked ambition. He framed it as the only path forward for his house and his daughter's children. He worked on his daughter, Alicent, with a patience that was nearly invisible. In the quiet of his solar, away from the court, he spoke to her not as a queen, but as a child he was trying to save from a fire she could not see. He explained the history of the realm. He talked about Maegor the Cruel and the chaos that followed when the succession was unclear. He talked about the Great Council of 101, the very council that had passed over Rhaenys in favour of Viserys. The precedent was already written in blood and law. The lords of Westeros did not want a woman on the Iron Throne. They would never truly accept her, and if they did not accept her, they would look to Aegon, and if they looked to Aegon, Rhaenyra would have no choice but to destroy him. He did not demand action. He simply planted the seed. He whispered that compromise was not a virtue in this game, but a surrender of everything they loved, a marriage pact, an oath sworn in a great hall. None of it would hold when the crown was actually on Rhaenyra's head. The realm would chew a queen up, and the children of the second wife would be the first to be devoured. He made Alicent believe that peace was an illusion, a trap designed to let their guard down so the Blacks could strike. Alicent listened. She began to see every kindness from Rhaenyra as a strategic maneuver. Every offer of peace was a delay to allow the Blacks to grow stronger. Otto convinced her that they could not afford to wait. They had to plant the seeds of their power now. While the old king still breathed, they had to gather allies, secure the treasury, and control the capital. The small council meetings became battlegrounds of quiet words. The Red Keep became a nest of whispers. The Greens and the Blacks were no longer just colours at a tournament. They were armies forming in the shadows. For a time, it seemed the king had had enough of the hostility. Viserys, tired of the open war at his court and longing for the peace of his youth, dismissed Otto Hightower from his service as Hand. He replaced him with Lionel Strong. The Blacks celebrated this as a great victory. The Hightower influence in the capital was broken. The princess had won the court, but Otto did not retreat in defeat. He returned to Oldtown, the ancient and towering seat of his house, and he waited. He knew the king was dying. Viserys was failing slowly, painfully. The king's strength was leaving him. The realm needed a steady hand on the tiller, and there was only one man left who knew how to steer the ship through the coming storm. The realm needed Otto Hightower when the whispers of the king's decline grew too loud to ignore. When the court began to feel the lack of direction, Otto Hightower was summoned back to the capital. He returned to find the king a shadow of his former self. Viserys could barely walk. His dreams were haunted by the ghost of his first wife. He had no strength left for the Game of Thrones. Otto knelt, took the king's hand, and promised to carry the burdens of the realm. He retook his place at the head of the small council. The king was old and increasingly frail, incapable of ruling. The hand ruled in his stead. With the king bedridden, the smell of sickness clinging to the air of the royal chambers, Otto moved the pieces into place. He secured the loyalty of the city watch with gold. He filled the treasury with Hightower coin. He sent ravens to the lords of the Reach, the ancient allies of his house. He made sure that when the moment came, there would be no hesitation. The transition would be absolute. The long game was over. He had played it perfectly. The realm was balanced on the edge of a single knife. The stage was set for a fire that would consume them all. The only thing left was for the king to close his eyes for the final time. As Otto Hightower manoeuvred from his tower office, securing the levers of the capital, the faction whose survival he sought to challenge was taking shape across the bay. The Blacks of Dragonstone were not merely a courtly opposition. They were a declaration of law itself. Their argument rested on Viserys' command, the oaths of the lords, and the principle that a king's word is law. The lords had sworn to Rhaenyra in 105. Viserys reaffirmed her status as Princess of Dragonstone in 112. For decades, Rhaenyra was the public face of the succession. To the Blacks, the claim of Aegon II was not a simple matter of a son over a daughter. It was a broken oath, a violation of the king's explicit decree. A king's command does not expire when he takes his last breath. That was their founding conviction. They rallied around Rhaenyra because she was the named heir, publicly affirmed for all those years. She was also the mother of a new generation of dragon riders. Rhaenyra's household was based on Dragonstone, the ancestral seat of Targaryen heirs. Ever since the conquest, Dragonstone had been the home of the Prince of Dragonstone, the title granted to the heir to the Iron Throne. Viserys had formally granted her this title, severing it from the tradition of the eldest son. By holding her court on Dragonstone, surrounded by the volcanic landscape that birthed the Targaryen dragons, Rhaenyra was acting the part of the acknowledged heir. She was not in hiding. She was in her seat of power. It was a dark, grim fortress, steeped in Valyrian magic and the history of a dynasty that conquered a continent. From here, she could command the narrow sea, keep watch on King's Landing, and harness the power of the dragons who nested in the Dragonmont. And what power that was! She began the war with more dragons and more dragon riders than her half-brother. Let that sink in. At the outbreak of the war, the Blacks had the upper hand in the most terrifying weapon known to man. Rhaenyra herself rode Syrax. Her husband, Prince Daemon, rode Caraxes, the bloodworm, the most battle-tested dragon alive. Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, rode Meleys the Red Queen, incredibly swift and fierce. Rhaenyra's sons, Jacaerys on Vermax, Lucerys on Arax, and Joffrey on Tyraxes, added to the tally. Daemon's daughters, Baela on Moondancer and Rhaena, who was without a dragon at the start, but who would later bond with the wild dragon Morning, also stood with the faction. Then there were the wild dragons and the older ones. Hugh Hammer claimed the great Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, once ridden by King Jaehaerys. Ulf the White claimed Silverwing, the gentle queen of dragons, once belonging to good Queen Alizan. And Nettles, a dragonseed of uncertain birth, tamed the wild dragon Sheepstealer. The Greens had Varga, the largest and oldest, ridden by Aemond, and Sunfire, ridden by Aegon. They had Dreamfire, ridden by Helena, and Tessarion, the Blue Queen, ridden by Daeron. But the raw numerical advantage, the depth of the bench, belonged to the Blacks. They possessed the speed of Meleys, the ferocity of Caraxes, the raw power of Vermithor, and the youthful promise of the younger beasts. But raw power is nothing without leadership. The Blacks were a coalition of strong wills. Rhaenyra herself was the centre, but she was no warrior queen in the field, at least not initially. She was a political creature, raised to believe in her own destiny. Daemon Targaryen was her sword, her most dangerous instrument. His ambitions were always a double-edged sword. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, brought the wealth of Driftmark and the largest navy in Westeros. Princess Rhaenys Targaryen was the living memory of what might have been. Her support healed old wounds between the Velaryons and the Crown. Together, they formed a formidable war council. Their strategy leaned heavily on controlling the seas and using their dragons to negate the Greens' logistical advantages in the Riverlands and the Crownlands. Yet, having the larger army of dragons does not win a war without conviction. The Greens held the most valuable piece on the board, the Iron Throne itself and the city of King's Landing. They also held the strategic initiative. While the Blacks debated their strategy on Dragonstone, the Greens spent the crucial first days of the reign of Aegon II consolidating their power, dispatching ravens, and preparing for the inevitable storm. For the Blacks of Dragonstone, the path to victory lay through swift action, but hesitation, grief, and the very weight of the overwhelming power they possessed would define their opening gambits. The Blacks were ready to fight. They had the dragons. They had the legal right. They had the symbolic seat of the heir. The first move in this game of dragons was about to be made. Within the Black Council, one figure stands apart, not merely an advisor or a commander, but a force in his own right. This is Prince Daemon Targaryen. Daemon is Viserys' younger brother, a brilliant warrior, a dragon rider, and a perpetual source of unease for everyone around him. Where Viserys sought stability, Daemon fed on chaos. He rode Caraxes, the bloodworm, a massive serpent whose temper matched his own. He was the sword without a sheath, the dragon unchained. Once presumed heir, he was displaced first by Rhaenyra and later by Alicent's children. Viserys named his daughter, then Alicent gave him sons. Daemon was pushed aside, his birthright denied by the king's choice and by the accident of his own birth. He became the heir without a throne, a prince without purpose at court. He made himself a king on the stepstones, ruling over a worthless crown of rocks and salt, because validation was better than nothing. His marriage to Rhaenyra joined two fiercely ambitious Targaryen claimants. It was a scandal that shook the court, a union built on shared blood and shared ambition. Rhaenyra gained the most dangerous warrior in the family, a man who would burn the realm for her. Daemon gained the legitimacy of her claim. They became a single united flame, one that burned hotter than any dragon alone. To the Blacks, Daemon is a weapon. To their enemies, he is proof that Rhaenyra's reign will be ruthless. He is the threat that makes their propaganda true. He represents a justice that is swift and without mercy. When the war began, he did not hesitate. He simply moved. Caraxes took to the skies, and the realm understood that the time for words had passed. He was the Prince of Chaos, and chaos had come. The Dance of the Dragons had its queen. Now it had its sword, and the land would feel its edge. But a sword, no matter how sharp, cannot win a kingdom by itself. Rhaenyra's cause needed more than Daemon's fury. It needed dragons, ships, gold, and people willing to believe that an oath still meant something. That belief lived in Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. She had been denied the Iron Throne years before, passed over by the lords of Westeros in favour of Viserys. She knew better than anyone how easily tradition could be twisted when powerful men feared a woman with a crown. Yet Rhaenys was not driven by the same hunger as Daemon. She had seen what ambition cost. She had buried children, endured humiliation, and watched her husband's house become entangled in a war that would consume it. Rhaenys brought wisdom to the Black Council, but wisdom in war can be a lonely voice. She urged restraint when others wanted blood. She understood that every dragon sent into battle was not merely a weapon, but a promise of devastation. Dragons could win castles, they could scatter armies, but once unleashed against one another, they could turn the whole realm into ash. Her dragon, Meleys, was among the oldest and swiftest in Westeros. The Red Queen was magnificent, scarlet-winged and fearsome, a creature built for speed and slaughter. With Meleys beneath her, Rhaenys was no forgotten princess. She was one of the most formidable riders alive. Her presence gave the Blacks a strength that could not be measured in titles alone. Then there was Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake. No man in the realm had sailed farther, gained more wealth, or built a greater fleet. His ships were the veins of Rhaenyra's war effort. Through them came soldiers, supplies, messages, and control of the narrow sea. Without Driftmark, Dragonstone would be isolated. With the Velaryon fleet, the Blacks could choke King's Landing from the water and turn every harbour into a possible battlefield. Corlys had his own reasons for standing with Rhaenyra. His blood was bound to hers through marriage, through children, and through the future of House Velaryon itself. But his loyalty was never simple. He was proud, calculating, and painfully aware of what the throne had cost his family. He had once hoped to see his wife crowned. Later, he had watched his son die, and his name become tied to rumours, scandal, and loss. For Corlys, this war was not only about Rhaenyra's crown, it was about the legacy he had spent a lifetime building. At the heart of that legacy stood Rhaenyra's sons. Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey were young, but they were not irrelevant. In a war built on inheritance, their existence was a weapon and a weakness at the same time. Their enemies called them bastards, insisting they carried no true claim to the Iron Throne. The Blacks answered with law, with royal decree, and with the simple fact that King Viserys had recognised them as heirs. Jacaerys, the eldest, carried more than his share of the burden. He was still a boy, yet he understood that the war would not be won by dragonfire alone. He was intelligent, steady, and more diplomatic than many men twice his age. Where Daemon inspired fear, Jacaerys could inspire loyalty. He represented the future Rhaenyra wanted to protect, a future in which her line would continue beyond the fighting. Lucerys was gentler, less certain of himself, but no less important. Driftmark had been promised to him, tying the Targaryen claim to the Velaryon name. That made him a target. In the cruel mathematics of succession, a child could become an enemy simply by being born in the wrong place, to the wrong parents, with the wrong inheritance waiting for him. And above them all stood the question that haunted every meeting on Dragonstone. How would this war truly be fought? The Greens held King's Landing, the treasury, the machinery of government, and the outward appearance of lawful rule. They had the Iron Throne beneath Aegon. They had Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, a man whose skill with a sword was matched only by the bitterness in his heart. They had Otto Hightower's patience and Alicent's determination, and they had Vhagar. Vhagar was not simply a dragon. She was history given wings. She had flown in the conquest. She had carried queens, princes, and warriors through battles that had already passed into legend. By the time of the dance, she was old, enormous and terrifying beyond measure. Her rider, Aemon Targaryen, had claimed the greatest living dragon, and with that choice, he transformed himself from the overlooked second son into one of the deadliest figures in the realm. The Blacks had more dragons. The Greens had the largest. That was the balance upon which the fate of kingdoms would rest. At first, Rhaenyra did not want the war to become a storm of fire. She had been named heir. She had sworn no oath to rebellion. In her eyes, the Greens were the usurpers, and she believed the realm might still remember its promises. Ravens flew from Dragonstone carrying demands, warnings, and offers of mercy. Lords across Westeros were forced to choose between a king they had not expected and a queen they had once sworn to serve. Some chose the Greens because they feared change. Some chose them because the Hightowers had power, wealth, and influence. Others chose the Blacks because their fathers had bent the knee to Rhaenyra, and honour still carried weight in their halls. But many waited. They watched the skies. They counted dragons. They listened for news from King's Landing and Dragonstone, hoping someone else would decide the war before they had to risk everything. That hope would not last. The conflict had already escaped the council chamber. It had passed beyond letters and claims and ancient arguments about law. Every lord knew what was coming. Sons would ride to battle. Castles would open their gates or bar them shut. Rivers would run red. And dragons, the creatures that had made the Targaryens rulers of Westeros, would become the instruments of their destruction. On Dragonstone, the Blacks prepared for a war unlike any the realm had ever seen. They had a queen with a stolen crown, a prince who craved battle, a fleet that ruled the sea, and a house full of dragons waiting to be unleashed. But in the end, the first blow would not come from an army. It would come from the sky. Daemon Targaryen gave the Blacks a terrifying edge in the air, a master of chaos riding the largest living dragon. But a war, a true war for a continent, is not won by fire alone. It is fought with gold, with steel, and with the slow turning of the tides. And no house in all of Westeros understood the power of the tides quite like the Lords of Driftmark. House Velaryon of Driftmark is the richest and most powerful naval house in Westeros. Their history runs parallel to the Targaryens, reaching back to the days of Valyria itself. They were not dragon lords in the old empire, but they were mariners, keepers of the sea lanes, and when the doom came, they were ready. They followed the Targaryens west, and they have been their most constant allies ever since. Their blood is Valyrian, silver of hair and purple of eye, but where the Targaryens look to the sky, the Velaryons look to the horizon. Their seat of power, High Tide, is not a grim fortress carved from stone, but a palace of white marble built upon the very edge of the sea, a testament to the wealth that flows from their dominion over the narrow sea. The architect of this immense power was Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake. Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, has built his fortune through voyages beyond the known world. He did not inherit greatness. He sailed out and claimed it. 9 great voyages he led, pushing further east than any Westerosi had ever gone. He passed the smoking ruins of old Valyria, a graveyard of a civilization. He sailed the coasts of Sothorios, a continent of endless uncharted jungle. He passed through the Jade Gates and traded in the fabled cities of Yiti, returning with holds overflowing with silks, spices, gemstones, and rare creatures. He made House Velaryon richer than the Lannisters, richer than the Hightowers, and with that wealth, he built the greatest fleet the 7 kingdoms had ever seen. 1,000 ships or more, sleek and fast, crewed by the most hardened sailors in the world. When the Sea Snake spoke, the seas listened. But even the Sea Snake could not match what his marriage brought him. His wife, Princess Rhaenys, carries the memory of being passed over at the Great Council. She is the queen who never was, and that title is a crown of thorns she has worn for decades. She was the daughter of the heir, a dragon rider of immense skill, politically astute and beloved by many. The lords of the realm chose her cousin Viserys instead, because he was a man. It was a wound that never healed, a bitter fire that burned beneath the surface of her composed demeanour. She married Corlys not just for alliance, but for a true partnership of equals. She brought royal blood and a dragon to the Velaryons, and he brought the wealth and the fleet that could challenge a kingdom. Together, they were a power that could not be ignored. When the dance began, Rhaenys did not hesitate. She saw in Rhaenyra another woman denied her birthright, and she threw the full force of her house and her dragon Melis behind the black cause. Her memory of that old slight fueled a fire that would scorch the realm. This alliance reshaped the very strategy of the war. Their fleet gives the Blacks the ability to choke trade, move armies, and threaten King's Landing from the sea. Consider what that means. King's Landing is a city of 500,000 people that depends entirely on the sea for its survival. Food from the Reach, stone from the Stormlands, timber from the Riverlands, trade goods from the free cities, all of it passed through the gullet. The Velaryon fleet closed that artery. The Black Fleet stretched across the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, a wooden wall of masts and rigging. No supply ships could enter. The price of bread in the city skyrocketed. The Greens were masters of the capital, but they were prisoners in their own castle, unable to move their armies by the fastest route, unable to break the siege without a navy of their own. The fleet allowed Rhaenyra to land her forces wherever she chose, to cut the Greens off from their allies, to dictate the pace of the war. It was a slow, patient, crushing pressure that forced the war into a long stalemate. This immense naval power, however, was built on a fragile foundation. The succession of Driftmark was a source of quiet, persistent worry. Lord Corlys had seen his son Laenor die under mysterious circumstances, his daughter Laena lost in childbirth. The direct line was fading. The future of the fleet, the control of the vast Velaryon fortune. These questions hung over the entire Black Alliance. Rumours persisted of 2 strong boys at Hull, the sons of a distant cousin, or perhaps of the sea snake himself. They were the Dragonseeds, bastards of the blood, and their rise would eventually shake the war to its core. But for the opening act of the dance, Lord Corlys and Princess Rhaenys held their house together, an iron bulwark of sea power for the Queen in the east. With this strength, the Blacks controlled the eastern seaboard. Dragonstone was secure. King's Landing was isolated. The Crownlands could not rally behind the Greens, without fear of the Velaryon swords looming from the sea. But a kingdom is not a single battlefield. It is a web of loyalties stretched across mountains, rivers and plains. The great houses of the realm began to receive their ravens. The Starks of Winterfell, the Arryns of the Eyrie, the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the Baratheons of Storm's End, the Tyrells of Highgarden. They heard the claims of the Greens and the Blacks, and they began to make their choices. Oaths sworn to a dying king, the traditions of 1,000 years, the whispered promises of power. The dance of the dragons was tearing a single family apart, and the rest of the continent would now have to decide where they stood. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey, I'm curious, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop a comment below and let our global community know. And if you're finding this as mind-blowing as I am, hit that like button to help more people discover this story. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, had spent decades building his legacy. He had sailed the far reaches of the globe, secured the wealth of House Velaryon, and sat on the king's small council. But a legacy requires continuity. A legacy must survive the man who built it. To ensure his bloodline sat the Iron Throne, he secured a marriage between his son, Laenor Velaryon, and the heir to the realm, Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. This marriage was the cornerstone of an alliance. It was the binding of 2 ancient Valyrian houses. Through it, Rhaenyra's sons were presented as the heirs of House Velaryon. Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey were born in quick succession, and as the sons of Laenor Velaryon, they stood to inherit Driftmark and its immense naval power. The union of Targaryen and Velaryon was meant to produce a new generation of Dragon Lords, a pure continuation of the blood of old Valyria. Yet almost immediately, their appearance fueled whispers that cut to the heart of that claim. Targaryens and Velaryons, with their pure Valyrian bloodlines, almost universally bore the hallmarks of their ancestors: silver gold hair and violet eyes. Rhaenyra's sons did not. They had brown hair, brown eyes, and pug noses. They looked nothing like Lyonor Velaryon, and everything like Sir Harwin Strong, the commander of the City Watch, and a man rumoured to be deeply, devotedly close to the princess. In the Red Keep, these whispers grew into a quiet but relentless storm. Lyonor Velaryon accepted the boys as his own. He claimed them. He played his part in the courtly drama, but the visual evidence was undeniable, and it was ripe for exploitation. The fact that Lyonor did not publicly dispute the children only deepened the suspicion for those who were already looking for cracks in Rhaenyra's foundation. Alicent's supporters used the rumours with surgical precision. They did not shout them in the throne room, but they whispered them into the ears of every lord and lady who would listen. They questioned the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's children. If they were bastards, Rhaenyra had broken her marriage vows. If she had broken her vows, what other oaths might she break? The entire foundation of her power began to crack. The argument shifted from the simple question of a woman's right to rule to the far more damning question of her character and the purity of her bloodline. Viserys I, by this time a frail man in constant pain, commanded that no one speak of the matter. He silenced the rumours with the full authority of the crown. He threatened to cut out tongues. But a rumour silenced is not a rumour killed. It simply waits, burrowing deeper into the foundation of the court, settling into the stonework, waiting for a fault line to open. This dispute over blood did not remain a quiet court scandal. It festered. It transformed the political rivalry into something far more personal and far more dangerous. The dispute over blood became another reason both sides believed the other could not safely rule. From the Black perspective, the Greens were not honourable opponents. They were schemers who attacked children to steal a throne. They were willing to destroy the reputation of 3 innocent boys to win a crown. If they would slander a child in the cradle, what would they do to a queen who opposed them in open war? The Blacks saw the rumours as a gross injustice, a sign that the Greens had no honour and no limits. From the Green perspective, Rhaenyra's actions proved her fundamentally unfit. A queen who would pass off as strong as a Velaryon was a liar who could not be trusted to keep the most sacred of vows. Her rule would be built on a lie, a direct affront to the gods and the laws of succession. The Greens saw the truth of the children's parentage as a clear sign that the entire succession was broken at its root. Neither side could back down. Neither side could trust the other to rule justly. The blood of the children made the war not just a political inevitability, but an intimately personal and deeply cruel conflict. It was no longer a debate over the law. It was a debate over the very identity of the house. This fundamental lack of trust is the bedrock of the war. It is why the peace could not hold. The first open wound born of this crisis was the succession of Driftmark itself. Lord Corlys Velaryon was wounded in the Stepstones, hovering near death. The question of who would inherit his seat forced the hidden whispers into the light of day. The dispute over blood was no longer a rumour exchanged in dark corners. It was about to be spoken aloud, with the full weight of the law and the threat of a dragon behind it. Daemon Velaryon, Corlys's younger brother, refused to accept Lucerys as the heir to Driftmark. To Vaemond, the matter was simple. Lucerys was not truly Velaryon, and therefore had no right to inherit the ancient seat, its wealth, or its fleets. He brought his claim before the Iron Throne, openly naming Rhaenyra's sons bastards, and demanding that Driftmark pass through the true Velaryon line. It was the accusation everyone had feared to make in public, spoken at last before the king, the court and the realm. The whispers that followed Rhaenyra's sons had a name attached to them that could not be spoken openly in court without consequence. That name was Strong, House Strong of Harrenhal, and the rumours that swirled around the heir and her sworn shield would prove as destructive as dragonfire, consuming the family from within before the war ever truly began. Lionel Strong was the Lord of Harrenhal, a man known across the realm for his wisdom and his sense of justice. He was a steady hand in a court that often lacked one. When King Viserys finally dismissed Otto Hightower as Hand, he turned to Lord Lionel in search of that steadiness. Lionel Strong rose to become Hand of the King, a position he accepted with a full understanding of the burdens it carried. He was a man of law, not of games, and he sought to strengthen the realm without getting tangled in the petty feuds of the Red Keep. But the games being played in his own household were anything but petty. His eldest son, Sir Harwin Strong, was known as Breakbones for his immense physical strength. He was the commander of the City Watch, a position of significant authority in the capital. But his true entanglement was far more dangerous than any street patrol. He became the constant companion and protector of Princess Rhaenyra. The gossip surrounding her sons inevitably dragged his name into the light. The children bore the brown hair of the Strongs, not the silver of the Targaryens, and every whisper in the court tied him to the succession question in a way that put his entire family at risk. The rumour had a cost, and House Strong was beginning to feel the weight of the debt. And then there was the younger son, Larys Strong, quiet, observant, a man who walked with a clubfoot but saw more than anyone gave him credit for. He did not seek glory in the tourney or respect in the law. He understood that the court was a game of whispers, and the loudest whispers the deadliest. He did not defend his brother's honour in public. He listened. He recorded. He was willing to profit from catastrophe. He collected secrets the way other men collected coin, understanding that in a court built on whispers, information was the truest power of all. To escape the pressure of the capital and the growing boldness of Queen Alicent's faction, Lionel made a difficult choice. He decided to remove himself and Harwin from court entirely. He planned to resign as Hand and return to their seat at Harrenhal. It was a decision meant to quiet the rumours, to let the fire of gossip burn out for lack of fuel. Instead, it fed a different kind of fire entirely. At Harrenhal, a blaze broke out in the ancient monstrous fortress. Lord Lionel and Sir Harwin were trapped inside. They perished in the flames before anyone could reach them. The cause of the fire was never officially settled, but Larys Strong, now the Lord of Harrenhal, inherited everything. He had remained in King's Landing during the tragedy, far from the flames. He had not mourned in any way that could be measured. He had calculated. With his father and brother gone, the path was clear for him to offer his services to the highest bidder, and that bidder was the Queen. Larys became the Master of Whisperers for the Greens, a shadowy figure who operated beneath the notice of most. A man who had proven he was willing to let even his own blood burn if it meant climbing higher. The rumour had cost House Strong everything. It cost the Blacks a powerful voice for reason within the small council, and it gave the Greens a weapon in Larys, a man shaped entirely by silence and the secrets of others. Queen Alicent now had a whisperer of her very own, a lord with no ties to Rhaenyra left to salvage. King Viserys' health continued to fail, and the succession he had spent his reign securing was now exposed on all sides. With the Strongs fractured, the path for the Greens to act was clearer than it had ever been. The realm held its breath, waiting for the crown to fall. But Viserys did not die before one final act of defiance against the forces gathering around him. As his body weakened and his pain grew worse, he still refused to name Aegon as his heir. He had chosen Rhaenyra years earlier, before the lords of the realm, and he would not undo that choice simply because his queen had given him sons. To Viserys, the matter was settled. To everyone else, it was only beginning. The king's final days were filled with confusion, grief, and dangerous misunderstanding. Alicent believed that in a fevered conversation, Viserys had spoken of Aegon and a prophecy of a promised prince. She heard what she needed to hear, whether the king truly meant their son, or whether he was speaking of the ancient Targaryen dream that had haunted his family for generations, mattered little once the words reached her ears. Alicent came to believe that her husband had changed his mind at last. When King Viserys died, the Greens moved with stunning speed. His death was hidden from the court, while Alicent, Otto, Criston Cole, and their allies gathered in secret. They understood that Rhaenyra, living on Dragonstone with her husband Daemon and her children, would have to be stopped before she could claim the crown promised to her. The king's body had not yet been laid to rest, but the struggle for his throne had already begun. In the shadows of the Red Keep, the small council divided itself. Some men argued that Rhaenyra was the lawful heir. Others insisted that no woman should rule, while a living son of the king remained. Lord Beesbury spoke for Rhaenyra and paid dearly for it. Sir Criston Cole silenced him forever, proving that the debate was no longer one of law or loyalty. It was a matter of blood. Aegon II was found, brought before the court, and crowned in the Dragon Pit. The crown that had belonged to Aegon the Conqueror was placed upon his head. The message was unmistakable. The Greens were not merely challenging Rhaenyra's claim. They were declaring that the old king's will no longer mattered. And far away on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra had yet to learn that her father was dead, that her throne had been taken, and that the realm was already sliding toward a war where dragons would turn against dragons. Whispers that surrounded Rhaenyra's children were more than just court gossip. They echoed through the corridors of the Red Keep and across the waves of Blackwater Bay. They were a poison, and the children of the court, Targaryens and Velaryons alike, drank deeply from that well. The adults' rivalry over the Iron Throne was no longer confined to the small council chamber. It had spread. It had spread into the next generation. It was at Driftmark, during the funeral of Rhaenyra Velaryon, that the cold fire of this inherited hatred found its first spark. Rhaenyra's dragon, Varga, the largest living dragon in the known world, a beast who had carried Queen Visenya during the conquest, suddenly had no rider. To the dragon lords of the realm, this was an event of immense consequence. A riderless dragon of Vargar's power was a vacancy on the board of power itself. Aemon Targaryen, the second son of Queen Alicent and King Viserys, had long been the target of quiet mockery. He was a dragon rider without a dragon. Rhaenyra's sons all had their own mounts. Jacaerys rode Vermax, Lucerys rode Arax. Even the young Joffrey had a hatchling, but Aemond, a true-born prince of the realm, was forced to watch them soar while he remained earthbound. The sting of that shame was deep. On the night of Rhaenyra's funeral, as the adults grieved and schemed, Aemond saw his chance. He crept to the cliffs where Vargar rested. Claiming a dragon as old and wild as Vargar is never an easy thing. It requires a will of Valyrian steel. Aemond spoke to the great she-dragon in the tongue of old Valyria, and through a force of will or sheer dragon blood, he succeeded. In the dark of night, Aemon Targaryen mounted Vargar and became a dragon rider. But there was a price for this victory. The next morning, Rhaenyra's sons, deeply loyal to their Velaryon cousins, were furious. Aela and Rhaena, Rhaenyra's own daughters, had expected Vargar to be theirs. They saw Aemon's theft as a desecration of their mother's memory. The children fought openly in the yard. It began with accusations and the cruelest of taunts. Aemond, drunk on his new power, threw the slanderous word strongs at Rhaenyra's boys, questioning their legitimacy to their faces. This was the deepest wound he could inflict. Jacaerys struck him. Lucerys, the youngest, was driven by a desperate fury to protect his family's honour. The fight turned savage. In the tangle of limbs and rage, Lucerys drew a knife. Aemond was bigger, stronger, but Lucerys was quick. He slashed Aemond across the face, the blade biting deep, cleaving through his eye. The Prince of the Greens collapsed, a wound that would leave a permanent scar and a void where his right eye once was. Aemond gained Vargar, but he would carry the wound and the resentment for the rest of his life. King Viserys was summoned. The children were brought before the Iron Throne. Queen Alicent demanded justice, an eye for an eye, insisting that Lucerys suffer the same fate. Rhaenyra argued that her sons had defended themselves against lies that called their very birth a crime. The king, desperate to hold his family together, forced a hollow peace. Aemond was made to apologise for calling his nephews strongs. Lucerys was made to apologize for the maiming, but no true justice was served. Alicent, driven beyond reason by the injustice she perceived, lunged at Lucerys with a dagger herself. Sir Criston Cole stopped her. The moment shattered the peace of the court permanently. The Queen and the Princess were now enemies in name as well as heart. Aemon Targaryen walked away from Driftmark, with the might of Vargar surging beneath his command. It was an incredible leap in power, but the seed of vengeance had been planted deep in his soul. He resented the king for his lack of judgment. He resented his mother for failing to secure revenge. And above all, he resented Lucerys Velaryon. This single moment of childhood violence, this loss of an eye, became the core of Aemon's existence. It was a debt he intended to collect. The hatred had been inherited. The children had written their names into the blood feud. The fragile court of Viserys Targaryen was fracturing beyond repair. Driftmark was not the end of this story. It was the beginning of the storm. And as Aemon healed, as his dragon grew restless, the realm slowly realized that the next time these children met, words would not be the first weapon drawn. The scars were now visible on faces and on hearts. Aemon Targaryen rode the largest dragon in the world, but he carried an eternal grudge. And in a realm divided by succession, built on secrets and stolen loyalties, the vengeance he would eventually seek would not just be for an eye. It would be a fire that consumed everything in its path. Years passed, but the wound at Driftmark never truly closed. Beneath the surface of courtly dinners, royal ceremonies, and forced smiles, every member of the family remembered exactly where they stood. Viserys grew weaker, more exhausted by illness and grief. His final years were spent trying to preserve a peace that had already died. Rhaenyra remained his named heir, yet Queen Alicent and her father, Otto Hightower, quietly built a rival power around her eldest son, Aegon. When King Viserys finally died, the realm stood at the edge of war. The Greens moved first. They hid the king's death, gathered their allies, and crowned Aegon Targaryen in the Dragon Pit. Across the narrow sea, on Dragonstone, Rhaenyra learned that the crown promised to her had been taken. The dispute that had once been whispered in corridors was now an open challenge for the Iron Throne, and among the most dangerous weapons in the coming conflict was Aemon One Eye mounted upon Vargar. He was no longer the mocked boy from Driftmark. He had become a hardened prince, cold, intelligent, and feared. Yet behind all his discipline remained the memory of Lucerys and the blade that had taken his eye. War would give Aemon what childhood had denied him: the chance to settle the debt himself. The night Aemon Targaryen claimed Vargar under the stormy sky over Driftmark, the balance of the coming war shifted irrevocably. It was not just a boy mastering a legendary beast. It was the opening gambit in a game of terrible strategy, because every dragon is both a creature of legend and a strategic weapon with a rider's loyalties. The Targaryens had used dragons for centuries to enforce their will, to burn their enemies, to project the power of the Iron Throne across a continent, but those were enforcement actions. This would be a civil war where both sides possessed the ultimate weapon. The symbolic value of a dragon was immense, but the practical military value was absolute. A dragon could destroy an army. A dragon could dismantle a castle. A dragon could turn a siege into a rout in a matter of minutes. The rider was the warhead. Their loyalty determined the target. The Blacks initially commanded the most impressive and diverse arsenal of dragons in the known world. Rhaenyra herself rode Syrax, a seasoned yellow beast who bore the queen into battle, though she was more a symbol of royal power than a frequent combatant. Daemon rode Caraxes, the bloodworm, a terrifying serpent of war, who had already burned the stepstones and earned a reputation as the most aggressive dragon in the family. Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was, rode Meleys, the Red Queen, whose speed was unmatched and whose experience stretched back decades. Then there were the younger dragons. Vermax, the Mount of Jacaerys, was growing quickly. Arax, belonging to Lucerys, was barely large enough to carry a rider. Tyrax's, the Mount of Little Joffrey, was a hatchling, and Moondancer, The fierce green dragon of Baelor Targaryen was small but full of spirit. The Blacks commanded Syrax, Caraxes, Melis, Vermax, Arax, Tyraxes, Moondancer, and others. In numbers, they held a distinct advantage. They could afford to strike in multiple places at once. They could send envoys across the realm, each with a living, breathing fortress at their command. Yet the Greens were not without their own terrifying might. Aemon Targaryen, having claimed Vargar, now rode the largest living dragon in the world. Vargar was a weapon that belonged to the Century of Blood, a beast that had been alive during Aegon's conquest. She was slow compared to the younger dragons, but she did not need to be fast. She was a walking apocalypse. Aemond, with his ambition and his anger, was a perfect weapon to guide her. King Aegon II rode Sunfire, the Golden. Sunfire was often described as the most beautiful dragon ever seen, with scales of shining gold and pale pink wing membranes. But beauty was not weakness. Sunfire proved to be a ferocious fighter, deeply loyal to his rider. Queen Helena rode Dreamfire, a pale blue dragon of considerable size and power. And in the Reach, Prince Daeron rode Tessarion, the Blue Queen, whose cobalt scales were the colour of a summer storm. The Greens possessed Vhagar, Sunfire, Dreamfire, Tessarion, and later dragons tied to shifting alliances. When riders fell in battle, their mounts did not simply vanish. They became prizes. They became wild cards. They became the seeds of further devastation. This was the war the realm had never truly imagined. The war's central terror is that no castle, army or family is truly safe from fire above. Harrenhal, the greatest fortress ever built, had been melted into ruin by Balerion 5 generations earlier. The lesson was the same. Walls meant nothing against a dragon. Casterly Rock might hold, but the fields around it would burn. Storm's End could withstand a siege, but its gates could be turned to ash. The dragon was the great equalizer. It could bypass every rule of warfare. It could strike the capital. It could burn the royal fleet. It could hunt down a fleeing prince in a storm. The lords of the realm, who had pledged their swords and their armies, quickly realized that their power were conditional on the sky remaining clear. The strategy of the Dance of the Dragons was not fought with lines of infantry and careful siege lines in the traditional sense. It was fought in the air. It was a war of mobility, of terror, of assassination. The question for both Rhaenyra and Aegon was not simply who had the better claim, but who could best wield this living fire. The realm held its breath as the great wings unfurled across the skies of Westeros. Knowing that the first true move would tear the kingdom apart, that first move came at Storm's End, where Lucerys Velaryon arrived as an envoy for his mother and found Aemond already waiting. What began as a mission of diplomacy became the war's first irreversible tragedy. Lucerys was young, frightened, and mounted on the smaller Arax. Aemond was older, enraged and astride Vargar. In the storm above Shipbreaker Bay, the difference between them was not merely skill, it was scale, age, and the terrifying unpredictability of dragons themselves. Arax snapped at Vargar. Vargar answered with death. When Lucerys and his dragon fell into the Black Sea, every hope that the conflict might still be contained died with them. Every dragon in the Black faction was a formidable weapon of war, Syrax, Caraxes, Melis. But a weapon is only as dangerous as the stability of the hand that holds the leash. And the hand of King Viserys I was trembling. In his final years, the king was not simply a man in decline. He was the last pillar of a union that was fracturing under the weight of its own ambition. The king's illness was a slow and terrible consumption. He suffered from a disease that ate away at him from the inside, covering his body with sores and robbing him of sleep. He lost weight rapidly. His once strong voice became a whisper. The Iron Throne itself, a massive construction of 1,000 melted swords, became an instrument of agony for him. The blades would cut him as he struggled to sit upright, and he often left the throne room stained with blood that was not from any battle, but from the simple act of ruling. The court watched him wither. Every absence from the small council was a signal. Every moment he spent sleeping instead of commanding was an opportunity. As King Viserys grew ill, the factions around him grew bolder. The Queen's party, the Greens, moved with quiet precision. They built alliances within the city. They secured the loyalty of the City Watch. They whispered in the ears of lords and ladies. The Master of Coin kept the treasury tightly bound. The Master of Laws prepared the legal justifications. King Viserys was not ignorant of the political machinations. He saw the letters being sent, the meetings being held behind closed doors, but he refused to act. He refused to settle the conflict decisively. He clung to a desperate, tragic belief that his family could remain whole. He thought that if he simply held the realm together long enough, would prevail over the ambition of the court. He would call Alicent and Rhaenyra to his chambers, making them promise to love each other, to be good to each other. He genuinely believed in the power of family bonds over the claims of politics. He was trying to heal a broken bone that had already healed wrong, jammed in place by resentment. Rhaenyra, however, saw what her father refused to see. The air in King's Landing had grown cold and hostile. Her allies were marginalised. Her children were targets of whispers and threats. She made the difficult decision to leave the capital. She took her husband, Prince Daemon, her sons, and her entire household, and sailed across the Blackwater Bay to the safety of Dragonstone. In that single act of withdrawal, she surrendered the capital. She left Alicent Hightower and her father Otto dominant in King's Landing. The Red Keep was theirs. The city was theirs. The king, isolated in his chambers, was effectively their captive. The Machiavellian Council of the Greens continued to plot. The Queen's party secured the Great Sept. They sent ravens to Oldtown. They prepared the grounds for a smooth succession. Rhaenyra, across the bay, was not entirely blind to these developments, but without a presence in the capital, her information was second-hand. She relied on the loyalty of a few spies and the love of her allies, but the distance was a weapon that the Greens used against her. When the final moment came, it was as swift as a blade in the dark. The king's breathing slowed. The maester stood aside, and Queen Alicent, by her husband's side, heard his final mumbled words. Words that she would interpret as a change in the succession. Whether he truly changed his mind, or whether the Queen heard what she wanted to hear, it did not matter. The story was set. The end came in the 129th year after Aegon's conquest. The king died quietly in his bed, surrounded by his maesters and his queen, but the quiet in the royal bedchamber did not extend to the rest of the castles. By the time the king drew his last breath, the court was already fully prepared to act before Rhaenyra could even learn the news. The Master of Whisperers had sealed the gates. The ravens were kept from flying. The small council was called into session, and the crown of the conqueror was placed upon the head of Aegon II, the eldest son of Viserys and Alicent. The war that the old king had spent his life trying to prevent had begun the moment his heart stopped beating. The succession crisis was no longer a shadow in the corner of the throne room. It was the only reality that mattered. The city of King's Landing held its breath. Word of the new king spread through the streets, a mix of celebration and confusion. The great sept of Baelor rang with bells, proclaiming Aegon II as the rightful king. The gold cloaks patrolled the streets to ensure loyalty. The Green Council had seized complete control. Across the bay, on the ancient volcanic island of Dragonstone, the news arrived by a single ship, a warning sent by a friend who had managed to slip out of the capital. Rhaenyra was told that her father was dead. She was told that her brother had taken the throne. The shock of the news rippled through the fortress. She did not yet know that she had been named a traitor. She did not know that her children had been stripped of their inheritance. She was still the princess of Dragonstone, the legal heir of the king, but in King's Landing, a new king had been crowned, and the realm was told to bend the knee. The dance of the dragons was no longer a political theory. It was a bloody, brutal fact. The decision that Viserys had refused to make for years was now being made by the flames of war itself. The realm that King Viserys had tried so hard to hold together was now split in two. The king's body had not yet grown cold when the first fires of the war were lit. The Greens had made their move. Now the Blacks would have to make theirs. The Iron Throne was empty, but two claimants stood ready to fill it, and the only language left between them was the roar of dragons. King Viserys I, in his final days, clung to a fading hope. He believed his family could stay whole, that the words he spoke on the night of the family dinner could somehow hold the realm together. But factions do not wait for kings to catch up to them. As the king drifted between waking and sleep, his strength utterly gone, the mechanisms of a coup were already turning in the shadows of his own castle. And then, in the quiet hours of the morning, the king died. The moment the breath left his body, the succession became an open wound. But instead of a funeral, instead of a proclamation, there was silence. Queen Alicent and her father, Otto Hightower, made a calculated choice. The king's death was concealed. His body was left in his bedchamber, the window sealed with wax, the door guarded by the king's guard. To the outside world, the king still lived. This bought the Greens precious hours to solidify their grip on the capital before the storm could break. And in those stolen hours, the Green Council assembled in the Tower of the Hand. Lord Otto Hightower presided. Queen Alicent sat at the table, not just as a queen mother, but as a force of will in her own right. Grand Maester Orwyle, Lord Larys Strong, and Sir Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, were all present. Aegon himself was nowhere to be seen, perhaps by his own design. The debate was stark. The Greens controlled the capital. They held the treasury, the fleet in the harbour, the swords of the Kingsguard, and most of the gold cloaks. But Rhaenyra had Dragonstone. She had dragons, and she had the written word of the king and years of oaths sworn to her by the lords of the realm. The question that hung in the air was brutal. Could Aegon II sit the throne securely while Rhaenyra lived? Some voices urged caution. Perhaps they could come to terms with the princess, offer her Dragonstone and Driftmark in perpetuity. Grand Maester Orwyle presented a letter of terms, offering Rhaenyra safety and lands if she renounced her claim. Others, particularly Sir Criston Cole, argued for a final solution. They pointed to the whispers of Rhaenyra's sons. They insisted that the only way to secure Aegon's reign was to remove Rhaenyra and her children entirely, silence them before they could raise their banners and mount their dragons. The council was divided on the method, but the direction was clear. There would be no sharing of power, Aegon or Rhaenyra. The realm was not big enough for both. While they talked, action was already being taken. The Greens did not merely debate, they struck. Loyalists to Rhaenyra within the Red Keep were identified and seized. Lord Lyman Beesbury, the elderly master of coin who had served 3 kings, dared to object to the very idea of setting aside Viserys' chosen heir. He was killed for it, thrown into the black cells, or murdered in his chair, depending on which account you trust. The truth is lost to the ages. But what is certain is that a voice for peace and law was silenced. Lord Laurent Marbrand, another man who had sworn to Rhaenyra, was placed under guard in his chambers. Across the city, those who might speak for the princess were cornered by gold cloaks who had once sworn to Daemon. The Red Keep became a cage. The council knew that legality was a luxury they could not afford. Every hour they delayed was an hour Rhaenyra might learn of her father's death and crown herself on Dragonstone. They needed a king. They needed a fait accompli. The decision was made. Speed mattered more than the careful observance of every law and custom. Aegon II would be crowned before the realm could fully weep for Viserys, and they would do it in the Dragon Pit, in the sight of the masses, under the banners of the Targaryen dynasty. They would present the realm with a king, not a question. But before a king can rule, he must be found. While the council debated strategy, Aegon himself had slipped away into the city. Hiding from the very crown, his mother and grandfather were planning to force upon him. He knew what the crown meant. He knew the war it would bring. And so, as the dawn spread over the towers of the Red Keep, the Kingsguard were dispatched into the streets of King's Landing with a simple command: find the king. Two separate parties were sent hunting through the city. Sir Otto trusted the cunning of his agents, sending Sir Aric Cargill with Sir Criston Cole to search the places where Aegon was known to indulge his appetites. Queen Alicent, meanwhile, sent Sir Eric Cargill and Prince Aemond. The twin brothers rode through the waking streets, but they were not truly on the same mission. Otto wanted Aegon found quickly and brought under his control. Alicent wanted her son found before Otto could shape him into a weapon. Their search revealed a portrait of the prince that none of them could hide forever. Aegon was not waiting in some noble retreat, contemplating duty or mourning his father. He had vanished into the darkest corners of King's Landing, into taverns, gambling dens, and houses where men paid to forget who they were. The future king had spent much of his life running from responsibility. Now the Iron Throne was chasing him. At last, Aemond and Sir Criston found him beneath the city, in a place of filth and cruelty, where even the gold cloaks preferred not to look too closely. Aegon was drunk, frightened, furious. He did not want the crown. He knew that accepting it meant standing against Rhaenyra, against Daemon, and against dragons. He told them plainly that his sister would make a better ruler than he ever could. But Aemon did not offer sympathy. All his life he had watched Aegon squander the privileges that had been denied to him in every way but name. To Aemond, duty was not an honour, it was a burden, and Aegon had no right to cast it aside now. Sir Criston Cole was even more direct. He reminded Aegon that whether he wanted the throne or not, Rhaenyra could never allow him to live safely once her rule was secure. The crown was not merely power, it was survival. Then Alicent arrived, and for a moment, mother and son spoke not as pieces on a board, but as two people trapped by the choices of a dying king. Alicent told Aegon that Viserys had spoken his name in his final hours. Whether she truly believed it, or needed to believe it, no one could say. But Aegon heard what he needed to hear. His father, who had spent a lifetime looking past him, had chosen him at the end. By the time they returned to the Red Keep, hesitation had begun to harden into resolve. The prince who had fled the crown was gone. In his place stood a man who had been told that the realm was his by right, and that everyone around him was prepared to kill to defend that right. The Green Council had made their choice in the shadows. King Viserys was dead, and his passing was a secret, a weapon they chose to wield in the dark. Alicent and Otto Hightower had won the argument. There would be no compromise. Rhaenyra would be set aside. Aegon, the eldest son, would sit the Iron Throne. But a crown is not won by decree alone. It must be taken, placed upon a head strong enough, or desperate enough, to bear it. And the first man who had to be convinced was the king himself. Prince Aegon Targaryen was not a willing conspirator. To know Aegon is to understand that he was a reluctant prince, a young man who sought escape in the bottom of a wine cup and the company of common women rather than the suffocating weight of duty and power. He had seen what the crown did to his father. He had no desire for it. When his mother and grandfather's men finally found him, it was not in the council chambers of the Red Keep. It was in a nameless hovel in the warrens of Flea Bottom, far from the eyes of the court, drunk and hiding from the very destiny they intended to force upon him. He was dragged, stumbling and afraid, before the assembled small council. What followed was not an acceptance speech. It was a negotiation born of pure terror. Aegon wept openly. He argued that he was not suited, that he did not want it. He knew, with a clarity that drink could not fully mask, that taking the crown meant war with his sister, the breaking of their house. But his brother Aemond, Sir Criston Cole, and the hand of the king made the only argument that could move him. It was the argument of fear. If Aegon refused the crown, they explained, Rhaenyra would take it. And if Rhaenyra took it, every man in that room and every child of Aegon's blood would be marked for death. His own sons, his daughter, his brothers, his sister's accession was not peace. It was a death sentence for him and his entire line. He was persuaded not by gold or glory, but by the rawest form of survival instinct. He had no choice. He accepted. The coronation ceremony itself was swift and heavily guarded. It took place in the seclusion of the Red Keep, far from the eyes of the realm. The crown they used was not the elaborate circlet of Jaehaerys, the conciliator. They reached for the crown of Aegon the Conqueror himself, a simple band of Valyrian steel set with great square rubies. It was the crown of a warrior king. The man chosen to place it upon the new king's brow was Ser Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. If you know the history of this time, you know the profound weight of this single gesture. Ser Criston had once been Rhaenyra's sworn protector, her champion in the great tourney, the man who had knelt to her in the Kingswood and given her his allegiance. Whatever bond had existed between them had long since curdled into a deep, bitter resentment. Some say it was pride, some say a broken heart. Whatever the cause, by crowning Aegon II, Criston Cole was not merely officiating a ceremony, he was making a final, definitive choice. He was turning his back on the woman he had once been closest to, and declaring war on everything she stood for. He placed the crown of the Conqueror on the head of the Pretender, and with that single act, he sealed his role as the kingmaker of the Green Cause. The public display of legitimacy was reserved for the Dragon Pit. You can imagine the procession winding through the dusty streets of King's Landing, the murmur of the crowd, the heavy step of the gold cloaks. The Dragon Pit itself was the centre of Targaryen authority in the capital. The great stone dome, where the royal dragons had been housed since the days of Maegor the Cruel. Inside, beneath the soaring arches, before a gathered crowd of nobles and small folk, the coronation was completed under the eyes of the High Septon. But the true proof of his right to rule was not the crown on his head or the oil on his brow. It was the living beast at his side. Beside the dais, coiled comfortably on the stone floor, was Sunfire. The golden dragon was a creature of breathtaking beauty, his scales like sheets of polished gold, his wings the colour of fresh honey. In the light of the torches and braziers, Sunfire seemed to glow from within. He was Aegon's greatest symbol of power, a declaration made in fire and blood. The crowd cheered. Some cheered for Aegon. Many cheered simply because a dragon was watching them, and a dragon inspires a certain obedience in any crowd. The king was crowned. The realm had its chosen ruler. The die was cast. With that single act, the nature of the conflict changed forever. The Green Coup was no longer a plot whispered in the shadows of the Tower of the Hand, or debated in the secret chambers of the Red Keep. It was an open rebellion, a flag raised against the final decree and dying wish of King Viserys I. Viserys had spent his final years in pain and sickness, clinging to the impossible hope that his family could remain whole. He had named Rhaenyra his heir before the entire realm, and he had made every great lord and landed knight swear oaths to her. By crowning Aegon, Alicent and her party declared that the king's word meant nothing when spoken against tradition. They declared that the sacred oaths of a decade were binding only to the weak and the honourable. The disputed succession was no longer a theoretical debate between scholars and maesters. It was a call to arms that would echo across every mountain, river and keep in Westeros. The realm was split in two. The ravens were already flying from the rookery, carrying word to every corner of Westeros. But one flight carried more weight than 1,000 others. The raven bound for Dragonstone. Just across the Blackwater Bay, Rhaenyra Targaryen sat in her hall of black volcanic stone, nursing the pains of a recent stillbirth and the quiet melancholy of an aging princess still waiting for her time. She did not yet know that her father had already been laid to rest. The news would arrive like a blade in the dark. Her father is dead. The throne has been stolen. Her brother wears the crown of the Conqueror. In the Red Keep, the Greens celebrated their bloodless victory, but the war was not bloodless. It had simply not yet begun. The Greens had made their move. Now in the hall of the painted table, where the map of the realm lay open beneath the dragon's skull, the Blacks would have to make theirs. Aegon II had been crowned within the Dragon Pit, his name rising with the incense and the acclamation of the crowd. The crown of the conqueror now rested upon his brow, and the gold cloaks had swept through the streets of King's Landing to ensure no voices of dissent rose too loudly against the new king, while the echoes of his coronation still hung in the air. Ravens were already flying across the Blackwater. Their destination was Dragonstone, and the message they carried was not one of peace, but of theft and treachery. When the ravens reached the island fortress, Rhaenyra Targaryen was heavy with child. The news struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her father, King Viserys, was dead. He had been dead for nearly a fortnight, and in his absence, the Greens had crowned his eldest son. The shock and the overwhelming weight of her grief proved too much. Rhaenyra was brought to her childbed that very night, and the sorrow she carried brought forth a daughter, born twisted and still. She had lost her father, she had lost her throne, and now she had lost a child. But grief in House Targaryen often hardens into a resolve as fierce as any dragon's flame. Her supporters gathered around her. Daemon Targaryen, her husband, Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. They retreated to the chamber of the painted table, where the whole of Westeros lay carved in stone beneath their hands. There was no talk of surrender, no talk of bending the knee. There was only the will to crown their queen. Rhaenyra rose from her sickbed, her face pale, but her eyes burning with the fire of her birthright. She walked to the great hall of Dragonstone, the ancient fortress of her ancestors, and there, beneath the stone dragons and the crimson banner of her house, Daemon Targaryen placed a crown upon her head. It was not the conqueror's crown, for that was in the hands of the usurper. It was a new crown, a circlet of Valyrian steel set with thick red rubies, crowned in the ancient Targaryen manner, by birthright and by dragonfire. She was proclaimed Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen, the first of her name. The Black Council was sworn into existence in that same hall. Daemon called for swift retribution, for an immediate conquest of King's Landing, before Aegon could strengthen his hold. He wanted dragons to rain fire upon the Red Keep. Corlys the Sea Snake urged caution, demanding that ravens be sent to the great houses of the realm to see if the oaths sworn in 105 AC still held any weight. The lords of the Narrow Sea debated the merits of each path, the air thick with the tension of impending war. Rhaenyra now faced a choice that would define her reign and the war to come. She could embrace the immediate destruction of those who had stolen her inheritance, striking hard and fast before the Greens could fully secure their power, or she could attempt to win back the throne through the ancient laws and alliances her father had built, trusting in the honour of the lords who had sworn their swords to her. The ravens were sent. They flew from the towers of Dragonstone to every corner of the realm, carrying the Queen's seal and the demand for fealty. Rhaenyra sat in the stone drum, listening to the debate around her, holding the circlet that was now hers by fire and blood. The war had not yet begun in earnest, but the lines were being drawn, not by swords or by dragons, but by ink and wax. As the lords of the Seven Kingdoms opened their scrolls and weighed their own terrible decision in the quiet of their halls, some answers came swiftly. The Vale declared for Rhaenyra through the voice of Lady Jane Arryn, who remembered the oath sworn to the late king's chosen heir. The north, far beyond the reach of either court, also leaned toward Dragonstone. Lord Cregan Stark had inherited Winterfell only recently, but he understood the meaning of a sworn word. The River Lords were divided in their halls, yet many remembered that Rhaenyra's mother had been an Arryn, and that the princess had once been named heir before the assembled lords of the realm. The Greens, however, held the great strength of the West, the Reach, and the Stormlands. Sir Otto Hightower had moved quickly after Aegon's coronation. Ravens carried promises of gold, offices, marriages, and vengeance. Old loyalties were measured against new opportunities. Every lord knew that choosing wrongly could mean the loss of lands, titles, sons, and perhaps even life itself. At Dragonstone, the Black Council turned its gaze toward the places where words alone might not be enough. The The Baratheons of Storm's End had long been powerful, proud, and difficult to command. Their support could open the Stormlands to Rhaenyra, or close them forever. The great castle stood near Dragonstone, across the narrow waters, and its lord had daughters to marry, but no sons to inherit. Daemon saw the value of a match at once. Rhaenyra's sons were sent as envoys, each riding a dragon. Viserys Velaryon, her eldest, flew north upon Vermax, carrying messages for the Vale and Winterfell. Lucerys Velaryon, younger and gentler, took Arrax through the storm clouds toward Storm's End. He was only a boy, yet he carried a queen's letter and the burden of a kingdom. Storm's End was not a place for a boy to stand alone. The castle rose like a black fist above Shipbreaker Bay, its walls built to withstand the fury of wind and sea. When Lucerys arrived, he found that another prince had reached the hall before him. Aemon Targaryen stood beside Lord Boros Baratheon, one eye of sapphire gleaming beneath his scar. He had come on Vargar, the oldest and largest living dragon in the world. Aemon brought terms the Greens believed would bind Lord Boros to their cause: a marriage for one of his daughters, a place of honour at Aegon's court. Lucerys had brought no such offer. He had come only with the reminder of an old oath, sworn by a dead lord to a dead king. Lord Boros was no man to be moved by memories alone. He mocked the boy's letter and demanded to know what Lucerys could offer in return for his allegiance. Lucerys could offer nothing. He was not a king, not yet a warrior, and not a diplomat trained in the cruel bargaining of great lords. He turned to leave, hoping that the ancient law protecting envoys would carry him safely from the hall. But old laws were fragile things in the gathering storm. Aemon demanded payment for the eye he had lost years before at Driftmark. He wanted Lucerys to put out one of his own eyes. An eye for an eye, a debt paid in blood. Lucerys refused. Lord Boros forbade violence beneath his roof, but he could not stop what waited beyond his walls. Arrax took to the skies through rain and thunder, desperate to outrun the vast shadow of Vargar. But Vhagar was a dragon of war, and Aemond was no longer the frightened child Lucerys had once wounded. Above the roaring sea, amid lightning and cloud, the chase became a battle. Then the sky opened with dragonfire and fury. By dawn, pieces of Arrax had washed upon the shores of Storm's End. Lucerys Velaryon did not return to Dragonstone. The war of ravens, seals, and sworn oaths was over. The war of fire and blood had begun. News of Aegon's coronation had reached Dragonstone like a cold tide. Rhaenyra had weathered a devastating personal loss in the very hours that Alicent Hightower placed the Conqueror's crown upon her half-brother's head. Despite the grief and the seething anger that threatened to consume her, the Queen's supporters did not hesitate. They crowned her in the ancient Targaryen manner, a ceremony that echoed the rituals of old Valyria, binding her to the legacy of their shared blood. The succession was now a war. The question before the Black Council was not if the realm would bleed, but how the first blood would be drawn. Rhaenyra's war council gathered within the grim walls of the Stone Drum. The air was thick with tension and the salt of the surrounding sea. It was a meeting marked immediately by fundamental disagreement, a fracture in strategy that would define the early character of the great conflict. The primary point of contention was the use of their most terrifying asset, the dragons themselves. Some of her advisors demanded immediate action. They urged the Queen to unleash their aerial supremacy against King's Landing, without a moment's pause. Aegon's reign was fresh, his crown still warm from the forge, his grip on the throne entirely untested by the realities of rule. A single night of fire, they argued, could bring the whole sordid affair to a close before it truly began. But Lord Corlys Velaryon, the Sea Snake, spoke with the authority of a man who had spent a lifetime navigating the currents of history. He urged Rhaenyra to embrace patience. A blockade, he argued, was the wiser and more righteous path. The Velaryon fleet was the greatest naval force in the known world. If they could control the Gullet, they could starve the capital of trade and resources. They could isolate the Greens without resorting to the indiscriminate horror of dragonfire. Corlys believed a slow, quiet siege was the surest road to victory, a path that would not leave the capital a charred ruin or turn the hearts of the small folk permanently against House Targaryen. Daemon Targaryen, the rogue prince, could not abide such cautious thinking. He had always favoured the immediate solution. Daemon argued that fear was the sharpest weapon they possessed. He believed the lords who had bent the knee to Aegon did so out of fear of the Greens, not out of any deep loyalty. A swift, terrible demonstration of dragon power would break that fragile allegiance and end the war almost before it began. He saw hesitation not as wisdom, but as a weakness that would cost them everything. Rhaenyra, seated beneath the painted table of Westeros, did not choose one path entirely over the other. She found a middle way. The dragons would not burn the capital, not yet. Instead, they would fly. They would become instruments of diplomacy. Prince Jacaerys took to the sky on his dragon Vermax, his course set for the Eyrie and White Harbour. Prince Lucerys followed on the younger dragon Arax, heading for the great stronghold of Storm's End. They were not sent as conquerors, they were sent as reminders. Reminders of the oaths their mother had been given in the year 105. Reminders that the dragons of House Targaryen had chosen a side, and that the time for choosing was now upon the lords of the realm. The two young princes vanished into the clouds, their dragons carrying the weight of their mother's crown and the fate of her cause. The success of their missions was entirely uncertain. The great houses of the realm would now be tested, their loyalties weighed in the balance. With every league the princes flew, the first true moves of the war were made, not yet with sword and flame, but with the fragile and ancient currency of honour and oath, a currency carried on dragon's wings across a kingdom that was rapidly dividing against itself. Jacaerys found a warmer welcome than many had expected. At the Eyrie, Lady Jane Arryn remembered the oath sworn to Rhaenyra and declared for the Queen. In the north, Lord Cregan Stark listened to the prince's appeal and saw the danger clearly. Winter was coming, and the Starks would not move their full strength at once, but their loyalty was secured. White Harbour also joined the Black cause, bringing the wealth and ships of House Manderley into Rhaenyra's growing alliance. Jacaerys had proven himself more than a boy, carrying messages. He had won powerful friends through courage, courtesy, and the force of his mother's claim. Lucerys faced a darker fate at Storm's End. He arrived before the ancient fortress, seeking the support of Lord Boros Baratheon, whose father had once sworn to defend Rhaenyra's rights. But the hall was not empty. Prince Aemond Targaryen had reached Storm's End before him, riding the enormous dragon Vargar. The Greens had come with an offer of their own, a marriage alliance, promises of power, and a place in Aegon's new order. Lord Boros was no scholar of old promises. He wanted advantage, and he was angered that Lucerys brought no marriage pact to offer his daughters. The young prince was dismissed from the hall. Rhaenyra's son had come as an envoy, unarmed and under the protection of guest right. Yet outside the castle walls, law and honour gave way to hatred. Aemond followed Lucerys into the stormy skies above Shipbreaker Bay. Arax was young, swift and terrified. Vargar was ancient, vast and built for war. What began as a pursuit ended in catastrophe. Amid thunder, wind and blinding rain, the dragons turned upon one another. Arax attacked in fear. Vhagar answered with devastating force. By dawn, neither Lucerys nor Arax returned to Dragonstone. The death of the Queen's son changed everything. Until that terrible night, there had still been voices urging restraint, blockade and negotiation. After Storm's End, the war had taken its first royal blood. Rhaenyra's grief became something colder, more dangerous. The dance of the dragons had begun in earnest. While the Black Council debated the merits of holding back their dragons or striking immediately, Rhaenyra Targaryen knew that securing the Iron Throne required more than just dragon fire. It required the allegiance of the great houses, their men, their castles, and their banners. And so, as her half-brother Aegon consolidated his hold on King's Landing, Rhaenyra dispatched envoys across the realm. The most delicate of these missions fell to her second son, the heir to Driftmark. Prince Lucerys Velaryon was tasked with flying to the ancient fortress of Storm's End to treat with Lord Boros Baratheon. Storm's End was a fortress built to withstand the fury of the gods themselves. It sat on the coast of Shipbreaker Bay, a place where the sea was eternally angry, where the winds howled and the waves crashed against the cliffs. It was to this formidable keep that Lucerys flew, mounted upon his young dragon Arax. He was 14 years old. He carried a message of commitment and supplication, reminding Lord Boros of the oaths his father, Lord Boromund Baratheon, had sworn to Rhaenyra 17 years earlier, oaths of fealty sworn before the realm, oaths that bound the Stormlands to the Princess of Dragonstone. When Lucerys arrived at Storm's End, the skies were already dark with the storms of autumn. The great hall of the Durandons, with its massive circular walls and its single soaring dome, was lit by torches that barely pushed back the shadows. And there, seated in a place of honour at Lord Boros's right hand, was his uncle Aemond Targaryen. Aemond had beaten him there. For days, Prince of the Greens had been a guest of the Storm Lord, and he had brought with him an offer that Lucerys could not hope to match. Aemond had come riding Vargar, the largest and most fearsome dragon alive in the world, the mount of Queen Visenya herself, a beast that had carried a conqueror, and in his pocket he carried a royal marriage pact. The Greens offered to wed one of Lord Boros's daughters, his blood, to Aegon II's firstborn son, Prince Jaehaerys. It was a crown prince for a princess of Storm's End. This was an alliance that would put the blood of the Baratheons directly onto the Iron Throne within a single generation. Lucerys delivered his message. He spoke of Lord Bormund's oath, of the sacred word of a Storm Lord, of the bonds of honour. Lord Boros listened, but his mind was already made up. The old oaths, he declared, were dead oaths. They were sworn by a dead king, to a woman who had since made a mockery of tradition, or so the whispers from the Red Keep had assured him. Boros Baratheon was not a man to be bound by the sentiments of his father. He was a man who wanted advancement for his house, here and now, in the flesh, not in the memory of a forgotten vow. "What will you offer me?" he demanded of Lucerys. Lucerys was bound by an existing betrothal to his cousin Rhaenyra Targaryen. He had no marriage offers to make. He had only the weight of history. Boros gave him a choice of his own daughters to wed, an offering that Lucerys could not accept without breaking his word to Rhaenyra and to House Velaryon. It was a political trap, and the young prince was caught in it. Boros made his choice. He chose the Greens. He told Lucerys that his mother was a rebel and that her claim was void. He commanded the boy to leave his hall, granting him the protection of guest right only as far as the castle gates. Lucerys, heart heavy with the failure of his mission, having felt the sting of rejection and the cold weight of his uncle's scarred gaze upon him, mounted Arax and flew out into the howling darkness of the storm. But Aemond was not done. The rivalry between these two princes was a deep and bitter wound, a festering resentment that had burned for a decade. Aemond had lost an eye to Lucerys when they were children. He had been mocked as Aemond One-Eye ever since. He saw Lucerys not just as an envoy of an enemy queen, but as the boy who had taken part of his face. With the arrogance of his blood and the power of the largest living dragon in the world, Aemond mounted Vargar and followed his nephew into the storm. What happened next is one of the most infamous events in the history of the Dance of the Dragons. High above Shipbreaker Bay, in the dark of the night, surrounded by lightning and rain, Aemond caught up to Lucerys. He may have meant only to frighten him, to humble him, to remind him of his debt, but he did not have command over Vargar. Vargar was an ancient beast, a veteran of 100 battles. She was a weapon of war, not a horse to be reined in by a young man's will. When Arax, the younger dragon, turned to breathe fire in panic defense, he spooked Vargar. Vagar's instinct was absolute. She did not tolerate a threat. It was a fatal escalation. Vagar lunged. In a single horrific moment, her jaws closed around Arax and the boy on his back. The young dragon was ripped apart in the sky, and Prince Lucerys Velaryon fell into the black, churning waters of Shipbreaker Bay. The act was done. The first blood of the royal family had been spilled in this war. Aemond had killed his nephew. He had committed kinslaying, the most cursed of all crimes in the eyes of gods and men in Westeros. He returned to Storm's End, not proud but shaken, claiming he had not meant for it to happen. But the act was done. The blood was in the water. When the news of this murder flew to Dragonstone on dark wings, the Black Council would be silent for a moment, and then the screams of a mother would fill the stone halls of the Targaryen fortress. Rhaenyra's grief was immediate and absolute. Lucerys was her beloved son, her heir to Driftmark. The war was no longer a political dispute over legal precedents. It was a blood feud. The strategy of blockade, of slow pressure, of holding back the dragons, died in that storm over Shipbreaker Bay. The Blacks would now demand blood for blood, and they had the fire and the fury of their own dragons to deliver a terrible retribution. The realm did not yet understand the depths of the war it had just entered. The Stormlands had chosen their side, and the cost of that choice was the first death of a prince. There would be many more before the sky stopped burning. I hope you're as amazed by this as I am. If you want to stay updated on more content like this, make sure to subscribe and join our community of curious minds. Trust me, what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew. The journey to Storm's End was meant to be a simple diplomatic errand for Lucerys Velaryon. He was to present his mother's case to Lord Boros Baratheon, reminding him of the oaths sworn to King Viserys, oaths that bound his house to the heir, Rhaenyra. But when Lucerys arrives at the foot of the Great Drum Keep, the dragon Vargar is already there, a living mountain of scale and fire, resting in the yard. Prince Aemon Targaryen has come first. Inside the hall, Lucerys finds Lord Boros seated beneath the crowned antlers of his house, a man who values the immediate over the remembered. Aemond offers him a marriage pact, binding blood to the throne. Lucerys offers words. Words are wind. Boros mocks the boy, refuses his mother's claim and sends him away. As Lucerys turns to leave, Aemond stops him. He demands payment for the eye he lost as a child. The old score settled in flesh. Lucerys refuses. The hall is silent. No swords are drawn, but the threat is absolute. Lucerys flees into the storm. He mounts Arax, his young dragon, and urges him into the sky above Shipbreaker Bay. The clouds are black with rain. He believes he is safe. He believes Aemond will not dare follow. But Aemond does follow, mounting Vargar, rising from the castle walls. What happens next is reported with terrible ambiguity. Above Shipbreaker Bay, the chase between Arax and Vhagar turns fatal. The smaller dragon, terrified by the ancient beast behind him, releases a burst of flame. It is a defiant act from a cornered animal. Vhagar is a seasoned war dragon, but the insult stings Aemond's pride as well. Whether Aemond intends murder or simply loses control of Vargar, Lucerys and his dragon are destroyed. The sea swallows them both in an instant. There is no body. There is no closure. The death of Rhaenyra's son makes reconciliation impossible. The war is no longer a political dispute over an iron seat. It is blood vengeance. The first blood of the dance is royal blood. It is dragon's blood. It is the blood of a child prince, torn apart by his uncle's ancient beast. Both factions prepare for vengeance. The Blacks demand Aemond's head. Aegon II, bound by blood and fear, will not yield his brother. There is no path back to the table. On Dragonstone, the news arrives with the dawn. Rhaenyra's grief is absolute, a physical force that breaks her. Daemon finds her clutching a piece of Lucerys's torn cloak, found tangled in the jaw of Vargar. The moderating voices on the Black Council are silenced by the weight of this single, awful event. Corlys Velaryon loses his grandson. The call for war is no longer a strategy, it is a demand. From Dragonstone, ravens fly. From King's Landing, armies march. The dragons are saddled for battle, not for show. The war of words is over. The dance of the dragons, the civil war that would tear the Targaryen dynasty apart, has claimed its first prince. The conflict is now a blood feud, sworn on the souls of the dead. The realm moves inexorably toward fire and blood. Daemon Targaryen does not wait for banners to gather or fleets to sail. He understands that grief must be answered before it can cool into caution. Somewhere in the shadows of King's Landing, he sends a message that becomes a promise of horror. An eye for an eye, a son for a son. The instruments of that promise are not knights or dragons. They are two killers who know the hidden veins of the city. One is called Blood, a former soldier of the Gold Cloaks. The other is known as Cheese, a rat catcher who has spent years crawling through the tunnels beneath the Red Keep. They are given a simple command: find a prince, make the Greens pay. On a dark night, they enter the castle through passages forgotten by lords and queens. They move beneath the chambers of the royal family, past walls that have witnessed generations of Targaryen secrets. Their target is not Aemond. The one-eyed prince is guarded, armed, and absent from the rooms they reach. Instead, they find Queen Helaena Targaryen with her children. Helaena is given a choice no mother should ever face. Name which of her sons must die. She offers them jewels. She offers herself. She begs them to take anything else. But Blood and Cheese have not come for gold, and they have not come for mercy. In the end, her young son Jaehaerys is murdered before her eyes. The death of the child prince tears through King's Landing like a scream. Aegon II is consumed by rage. Helaena retreats into grief, shattered by the cruelty inflicted upon her family. Even those who support Rhaenyra are forced to confront what vengeance has become. Lucerys was killed in the sky by Vhagar's jaws. Jaehaerys is killed in his bed by men with knives. The war has found its true shape. No one is safe because they are innocent. No one is spared because they are young. The people of the capital begin to fear the dragons above them and the darkness beneath their feet. They whisper that the royal family is cursed. They speak of kinslayers, child killers, and ancient sins returning to punish House Targaryen. Every death creates another wound, and every wound demands another death. Aegon answers with fury. Rewards are promised for the killers. Blood is captured and questioned, while Cheese vanishes into the city. The names of Daemon and Rhaenyra are spoken with hatred in the streets of King's Landing, yet the Blacks do not break. Their forces continue to gather at Dragonstone, Harrenhal, and the Riverlands. The realm is dividing itself into armed camps. Soon, castles that once answered to the same crown will raise banners against one another. Brothers will face brothers. Lords will discover that old oaths carry a price paid not in words, but in sons, daughters, and burned fields. Above them all, dragons wait, each one capable of turning a battlefield into a graveyard. The dance has begun in earnest, and with every act of revenge, the distance between victory and ruin grows smaller. Lucerys Velaryon's death tears through the Black faction like a blade of fire. Rhaenyra is consumed by a grief so deep it threatens to drown her. But Prince Daemon does not simply grieve, he acts. In the days following the tragedy above Shipbreaker Bay, Daemon makes a solemn, terrible vow. He answers Lucerys' death with a message of revenge. An eye for an eye, a son for a son. Daemon knows the Greens will expect dragon fire. They will expect a battlefield reprisal. Instead, Daemon reaches into the deepest, most forgotten corners of King's Landing. He seeks out men who exist in the shadows of the city, men who are as far from the glory of a knight or the honour of a lord as it is possible to be. A man named Blood, a former man-at-arms dismissed from the city watch for brutal violence, who later turned to murder for hire, and a man named Cheese, a rat catcher who knows every hidden passage, every forgotten sewer, every dark stairwell in the Red Keep. Their names are crude, their characters darker still. These agents, known forever by their specific epithets, Blood and Cheese, infiltrate the Red Keep through the city's hidden underworld. The tunnels beneath the keep are Maegor the Cruel's dark legacy, labyrinth of secret ways meant to protect a paranoid king from his own subjects. Cheese knows these paths intimately. He has spent years chasing rats through them. Now they hunt a different quarry. They bribe a guard or poison a door. The specifics are lost, but the result is the same. They slip past the sleeping garrison. They climb the winding stairs into the royal quarters. The castle breathes slowly in the deep of the night. It is dark when they find the door to the Queen's chamber. Queen Helaena wakes to find blood looming over her bed, knife in hand. Her two children, Prince Jaehaerys and Prince Maelor, sleep beside her in the quiet dark. Blood and cheese do not come to kill quietly. Their purpose is to make the Queen suffer, to make the Greens feel the very terror Daemon felt. They give her a choice no mother should ever face. They force Queen Helaena to choose between her sons. She is a gentle soul, a woman more absorbed in dreams and prophecies than the brutal politics of her family. How can she choose? She pleads with them. She begs them to take her own life instead. Blood ignores her. Cheese forces the issue. Jaehaerys or Maelor. Blood seizes the young prince. Jaehaerys is only 6 years old. Aegon II's eldest son, the direct heir to the throne. Blood holds a blade to the boy's throat. Before the Queen can scream, before any guard can break the door, Blood carries out Daemon's dark command. He kills young Prince Jaehaerys right there in front of his mother, the blood soaking the royal sheets. The murder of a child in his mother's bed is an act that can never be taken back. The atrocity devastates the Green royal family completely. Queen Helaena is utterly destroyed. Her mind, already fragile from the burdens of prophecy and queenship, breaks entirely. She will never be whole again. She sees blood in everything. She whispers endlessly of beasts and death, lost to the world around her. King Aegon II is consumed by a rage unlike any other. His grief is a wildfire of vengeance. A son has been taken for a son. Lucerys for Jaehaerys. The war is no longer about a crown or a succession. It is about annihilation. This single act of horror, sanctioned by Prince Daemon, poisons the war beyond repair. Mercy is discarded entirely. Every battle from this point forward will have the shadow of Jaehaerys' murder hanging over it. The conflict will spiral into a carnage that sets the realm itself on fire. Brother against brother, dragon against dragon. The Red Keep has become a tomb for children. The realm now understands that this is a war without rules, without honor. The death of the young prince forces the Black faction to confront what they have truly unleashed. From Dragonstone, Rhaenyra must now consider how far she is willing to go to claim her father's throne, knowing the cost has been paid in the blood of innocents. The Riverlands begin to stir with the march of armies, and the sea lanes are watched by hungry dragons. The kingdom as a whole is balanced on a single, terrible question. How much blood are the Blacks and the Greens willing to spend to keep their hold on the Iron Throne? The answer comes swiftly. In the Riverlands, old loyalties harden into armies. Lords who once hoped to remain neutral discover that neutrality is no longer possible. The great houses must choose a dragon banner, a king, or a queen. Daemon takes Harrenhal, the cursed black fortress that looms over the God's Eye, and from its ruined towers he threatens the heart of the realm. The Blacks hold Dragonstone, the Velaryon fleet, and many of the realm's greatest dragons. But the Greens possess King's Landing, the crown, and the machinery of royal power. Each side believes victory is within reach. Neither yet understands that victory will cost them almost everything. Blood and cheese was a wound the Red Keep could not hide. The assassination of Prince Jaehaerys sent a shiver through every corridor of power. King Aegon's court was paralysed by fear. Queen Alicent was forced to sit upon the throne, with her son's blood still staining the stones. A constant reminder that Daemon Targaryen would answer cruelty with cruelty. But the war Daemon had just declared required more than assassins in the dark. It needed armies, it needed territory, and the first place to erupt into open flame was the Riverlands. The Riverlands sit between the major powers of Westeros. Look at the map and you see it immediately. The Great Trident flows from the east to the west, a web of rivers dividing the land into rich, vulnerable valleys. To the west are the Westerlands, home to the Lannisters and their gold. To the east, the Mountains of the Moon guard the Vale. To the north lies the Neck and the loyal forces of Winterfell. To the south are the Crownlands, the Reach, and ultimately King's Landing itself. There is no natural fortress here, no mountain range, no desert. This is the crossroads of the continent. Armies must cross these rivers. Armies must eat from these fields. Armies must live in these castles. And so, the Riverlands become the first great battlefield of the war, the ground upon which the full weight of the succession crisis would fall. Lords there divide according to old loyalties, family feuds, and promises from both courts. Lord Grover Tully was the Lord Paramount, the Lord of Riverrun. He was old, well past 90 years of age, and his mind was slipping into the fog of age. His grandson and heir, Sir Elmo Tully, was more cautious, a man who remembered the oath sworn to Rhaenyra years ago. But the decision on which direction the River Lords would turn was not entirely theirs to make. Daemon Targaryen had made a choice. He did not need to convince them one by one, with words alone. He flew. Daemon took Harrenhal. He mounted Caraxes and flew west from Dragonstone, over the gleaming water of the God's Eye, straight towards the largest fortress in all of Westeros. Harrenhal is a monument to tyranny and conquest, a massive, twisted castle built by Harren the Black and melted by Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, Velaryon the Black Dread. The stone still weeps in places, warped by the ancient heat. It is said to be cursed. Every lord who takes it meets a terrible fate. But Daemon was never one to fear a curse. He landed Caraxes in the wide, shadowed yard, and the garrison knew better than to fight. Sir Simon Strong, the Castellan, was an old man. He surrendered the keys to the fortress without a word of defiance. He had no love for the war and no desire to be roasted alive. Daemon took Harrenhal, turning the cursed fortress into a black base of operations. From the King's Pyre Tower, he sent ravens across the Riverlands, summoning the banners. He was not just taking a castle. He was planting Rhaenyra's flag in the very heart of the continent, a challenge the Greens could not ignore. The conflict in the Riverlands reveals that each regional house has its own reasons for choosing a dragon banner. Consider the Blackwoods of Raventry Hall. Their blood feud with the Brackens of Stonehenge is a conflict 1,000 years old. The Blackwoods follow the old gods. The Brackens follow the new. When Lord Samwell Blackwood swore for Rhaenyra, Lord Humphrey Bracken did the natural thing. He swore for Aegon. Their loyalty was not to the Iron Throne or the question of succession. It was to settling a grudge, to burning their ancient enemies under the banner of a king or queen. Then there is House Strong. Larys Strong, the clubfoot, served the Greens as Master of Whisperers in King's Landing. He was a creature of the Red Keep, a man of shadows. But his kin at Harrenhal surrendered the castle to Daemon. The family was split, physically and politically, by the war. House Darry chose the Blacks, remembering their service to Rhaenyra's mother. House Mouton of Maidenpool chose the Blacks as well, hoping for favour and trade. But others, like House Piper and House Vance, divided even within their own families. Brother against brother, the Riverlands became a patchwork of banners. Golden dragons and red dragons marched against each other along the banks of the Red Fork. Ancient enmities resurfaced, and the land began to bleed. The war in the Riverlands is not simply a war between two claimants to the Iron Throne. It is a war of ancient, unresolved histories. The curse of Harrenhal, the feud of Blackwood and Bracken, the tense neutrality of Riverrun. It all comes to a head because this land is the battlefield. The armies must march here. The dragons must patrol here. The loyalties here show that the Dance of the Dragons is not a clean schism. It is a messy, brutal conflict where every house brings its own baggage, its own grudges, its own secret hopes to the edge of the sword. Daemon sat in the Tower of Ghosts, looking out over the smoking towers of Harrenhal, and the realm began to bleed from its very heart. Across the realm, other battlefields were calling. The seas were dark with Velaryon and red wine sails preparing for open war. The Reach was stirring as lords young and old sharpened their swords. And in the stormy skies of the eastern coast, a different kind of strategy was about to unfold, drawing the dragons away from the Trident and towards the sea. The Riverlands had become a crucible. The war had spilled across its fields and rivers, turning old friends into enemies and every holding into a potential tomb. While the Riverlords bled and the black smoke of burning villages smeared the sky, the fate of the war was being decided elsewhere, beyond the Neck, in a land that rarely concerned itself with the squabbles of southern kings. An ancient promise hung in the balance. Viserys Velaryon, the firstborn son of Rhaenyra Targaryen, knew that winning this war meant winning more than just the Crownlands. It meant winning the North, and so he flew. On the back of his young dragon, Vermax, Viserys struck out from Dragonstone, leaving the comforts of his mother's court behind. The weather grew colder. The green fields of the Riverlands gave way to the grey granite of the Neck, and then the vast silent forests of the north. It was a journey of hundreds of leagues, over territory that had sworn no love to Targaryen dragons since the days of Aegon the Conqueror. Viserys was not simply an envoy, he was a tenuous bridge between two worlds. The north had kept its own counsel for 100 years. They had not fought in the fields of fire, but they had knelt, and a kneeling vow is a vow still. He was met at Winterfell by Lord Cregan Stark. Cregan was a young man, only 22, but he carried the grave serenity of a ruler who had already buried his father and tasted the responsibilities of winter. Viserys presented his mother's case. He spoke of Viserys' wishes. He spoke of the green usurpers in King's Landing. But Cregan Stark was not easily swayed by the gift of speech. He weighed the words against the old oaths. An oath had been sworn to Rhaenyra when she was named heir. The North does not forget. The North does not break its word. Lord Cregan Stark honoured the oath sworn to Rhaenyra. He committed the North to the Black cause. It was a decision that would echo long after the war was over. But Cregan was a northern lord and a son of winter. He knew that promises between kings and queens were often written in the wind. He demanded a concrete bond, a promise that would tie the blood of the dragon to the blood of the wolf forever. And so the pact of ice and fire was sealed. A future marriage. A Targaryen prince of Rhaenyra's line would wed a Stark daughter. The first child of that union would inherit the North. It was a contract spanning generations, a promise that the alliance between Winterfell and the Iron Throne would be more than just a season of war. It would be a matter of blood. With the pact agreed, the North began to move. It is not a land that wages war quickly. The winter wolves had to be summoned from their holdfasts. The mountain clans had to be brought down from their peaks. The frosty fields had to be crossed. Cregan Stark gathered his army, nearly 8,000 strong, and began the long march south. They would miss the summer battles. They would miss the fall of King's Landing. But the weight of their coming was enormous. The North was the largest kingdom. It was the most feared. Knowing that Winterfell marched for the Blacks forced the Greens to look over their shoulders. It meant the war could not be won with a single siege. The entire continent was now divided. The North's allegiance proved that Rhaenyra's cause was not a desperate rebellion, but a true claim backed by the bedrock of the realm's oldest laws. But the North is far, and war waits for no army. While Cregan Stark's forces trudged through the snows and mud, the war in the south was accelerating into a darker phase. The dance of dragons was becoming a dance of shadows. The murder of Lucerys had been answered with the brutal death of a child in the Red Keep. Daemon Targaryen's taste for blood had been whetted. Rhaenyra's desire for the throne was hardening into something cold and implacable. The war was no longer about the legitimacy of a crown. It was about survival, about vengeance, about a family tearing itself apart until nothing remained but ash and iron. The oaths of the North would tip the scales, but the war itself would decide the price. That price would first be paid in the Riverlands, where castles changed hands, villages burned, and every lord was forced to choose between the dragon above his roof and the oath in his heart. Daemon Targaryen moved quickly. With Caraxes beneath him, he descended upon Harrenhal, the vast cursed fortress that had broken stronger men than him. Sir Simon Strong surrendered without a fight. Stone walls were meaningless when a dragon could turn them into a furnace. From Harrenhal, Daemon reached out to the Riverlords. Some came willingly, bound by old loyalty to Rhaenyra. Others came because they feared Caraxes more than that they feared the wrath of King Aegon. The Riverlands became the great battlefield of the war, a place where every road led toward bloodshed. House Blackwood declared for the Blacks. House Bracken raised banners for the Greens. Ancient rivalries, older than the conquest itself, found new life beneath the banners of rival dragons. Yet Daemon's victory at Harrenhal did not bring peace. It brought the war closer to every doorstep. The Greens still held King's Landing, the Treasury, and the royal court. Aegon II sat the Iron Throne, crowned before the eyes of the realm, while Rhaenyra remained on Dragonstone, surrounded by dragons, but separated from power. Both sides believed that time favoured them. Both sides were wrong, for in a war fought by dragons, no victory came cleanly. Every triumph left behind another enemy. Every dead prince created another debt of blood. And as armies gathered in the Riverlands, the skies above Westeros were beginning to fill with wings. The North had honoured the pact of ice and fire. Lord Cregan Stark's oath to Rhaenyra sent the swords of the North marching south, a slow and inevitable tide. But the Green faction was not a faction of frozen oaths and distant alliances. Their strength lay in the oldest city in Westeros, Oldtown, and in that city, the Hightowers had built a machine of war that rivaled even the dragons of Dragonstone. While the Starks moved with the deliberate weight of winter, the Hightowers moved with the silver tongue of the treasury and the iron hand of a city that had watched dynasties crumble into dust. House Hightower turned Oldtown into the Green faction's deepest reservoir of wealth, men and influence. This was no accident of war. It was a lifetime of careful positioning. Otto Hightower had served as Hand of the King. His daughter Alicent was the Queen Mother. Their blood sat upon the throne in the person of Aegon II, and the city they controlled was the true capital of southern commerce. Every ship that sailed from the Summer Sea to the Sunset Sea paid a toll to the Hightower. Every cask of Arbor gold that crossed the Reach was taxed on the wharfs of Oldtown. The Hightowers could summon the swords of their vassals, but they could also hire the steel of sellswords from across the narrow sea. They loaned gold to kings and princes. In Oldtown, the Greens possessed a treasury designed to outlast any siege and outspend any rival. The city poured its strength into the Green armies. Soldiers from the City Watch, knights from the surrounding lands, and sailors to crew the fleets of the Reach. It was the engine that drove the entire Green War effort. Yet the power of Oldtown was never just gold and steel. The faith of the Seven and the Citadel gave Oldtown a cultural authority beyond its armies. The High Septon sat in the Starry Sept. His words carried the weight of divine judgment for millions of believers across the continent. When he placed the crown upon the head of Aegon II, he did more than bless a king. He branded Rhaenyra a usurper in the eyes of the faithful. He sanctified the Green cause. The Citadel was the library of the world. The maesters who served every great house studied in the silent halls of Oldtown. They learned their history, their science, and their politics within earshot of the Hightower. When the war began, the Citadel's silence spoke volumes. The histories of the dance would be written by men who dined at the tables of the Hightowers. The narrative of the conflict, the framing of the succession, the rumours of bastardy, the legitimacy of the Queen, were shaped in the streets of Oldtown before a single sword was drawn in the Riverlands. This cultural control was the subtle glue that held the Green Alliance together, binding the pious lords of the South to a cause they believed was blessed by heaven. This authority required a champion in the field. The Greens found that champion in Prince Daemon Targaryen, the third son of Viserys and Alicent. Daemon had been sent to Oldtown as a ward before the war ever began. He grew up in the shadow of the Hightower, a student of the faith, and a reader in the libraries of the Citadel. He was given a dragon egg as a cradle gift, and from it hatched Tessarion. Tessarion was a dragon of exceptional grace, her scales a brilliant blue and copper, her flame a vivid blue fire that marked her as distinct among the dragons of the dance. She was smaller than Vargar or Sunfire, but she was fierce and swift. When war erupted, Prince Daemon and his dragon Targaryen became the Green's principal force in the Reach. Lord Ormond Hightower raised the green banner to march against the Black Lords of the South. Daemon took to the sky. At the Battle of the Honeywine, the Black host was large and confident, cornering the Hightower army. Daemon descended upon them like a bolt of summer lightning. Targaryen's blue flames turned the entire field, scattering the enemy and making Daemon the Daring a legend in a single afternoon. He was the chivalric ideal of the Green cause. Young, handsome, brave and devout, he was the prince the Greens could show the world. Yet the Reach itself was a fractured land, and no single victory could unite it. The Lord of Highgarden, Lionel Tyrell, was a child of only 7 years. The power of Highgarden was paralysed. Without a strong warden of the South, the Lords of the Reach followed their own ambitions. The Florents of Brightwater Keep nursed a deep resentment of the Hightowers. The Rowans of Goldengrove declared for Rhaenyra, defying the green tide. The Tarlis of Horn Hill were split, as were the Oakhearts and the Beesburys. The Redwynes of the Arbor, though allied with the Hightowers, were a power unto themselves. Lord Ormond Hightower found himself fighting a dozen minor wars across the region. Instead of marching his full army to the capital, Daemon could win battles, but he could not govern the pride of the Reach Lords. Every victory was followed by a new insurrection. The Green Heartland was bleeding itself white in a civil war within the civil war, wasting the very soldiers and supplies that Aegon II desperately needed to hold the throne. The Reach was supposed to be the solid foundation of the Green Alliance. Instead, it became a grinding campaign of sieges and scorched fields. The dance of the dragons in the Reach forced the Greens to make a difficult choice. Daemon and the Hightower armies became a roaming weapon, stamping out resistance while the fires of rebellion reignited behind them. The greater war for the Iron Throne was waiting. Every day the Reach spent devouring itself was a day the Blacks grew stronger in the Riverlands and on Dragonstone. Rhaenyra was gathering her strength. Daemon was waging his shadow war. The North was marching. The Green Council knew that time was not an ally. They needed the gold and the men of the Reach to flow into the Crown Lands. But the Reach refused to be simply a reservoir of strength. It was a storm unto itself, chaotic and unpredictable. The war for the Iron Throne was no longer a simple contest between two courts in King's Landing and Dragonstone. It had spread across an entire continent. The Hightowers had the deepest pockets and the most ancient authority. But authority and gold could not command the unanimous loyalty of a fractured land. The Green Heartland was a paradox. It was the source of their greatest power and the foundation of their deepest vulnerability. As the armies of the Reach maneuvered through the passes and the meadows, the centre of the war shifted inevitably toward the east. The dragons of the Greens were scattered. Vargar sailed the skies of the Riverlands. Sunfire guarded King's Landing. Targaryen hunted in the south. But a scattered fleet of dragons cannot fight a coordinated war forever. The price of holding the south was being paid in the blood of the Reach. The chains of gold and faith that bound the Green faction together had been forged in the oldest city in Westeros, and from that forge, the war would spread to consume everything the Hightowers had built. From the halls of Oldtown, where the Hightowers wielded the wealth of the Reach and the authority of the faith, the Green Council turned their attention to the battlefield. They understood that the war could not be won by politics alone. They needed a decisive victory, one that would strip the Blacks of their greatest military asset and shatter their morale. The stage was an unassuming castle in the Crownlands called Rook's Rest. Rook's Rest was held by Lord Staunton, a loyalist of Rhaenyra. When Sir Criston Cole marched his army into the territory and laid siege to the castle, it seemed like a routine engagement. The call for aid went out to Dragonstone immediately. In King's Landing, Rhaenyra's council debated the risk. Her son Lucerys had been killed only weeks before. The loss of another dragon rider would be a catastrophe, but Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, argued that abandoning a sworn lord was a path to ruin. If Rhaenyra would not defend her own, no one would fight for her. Reluctantly, Rhaenyra agreed. She sent the most formidable rider she had, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. Rhaenys took to the sky on the crimson dragon Melis, the Red Queen. She flew for Rook's Rest, unaware that she was flying directly into the jaws of the Green's master plan. Rook's Rest became the stage for one of the war's clearest green traps. The bulk of Cole's army was hidden in the forests surrounding the castle, waiting for a single signal. Princess Rhaenys arrived on Melis to defend the black position against the attackers. She descended on the vanguard, burning their siege equipment and scattering their formation. It was a slaughter, but it was exactly what the Greens wanted. From above the clouds, two shadows emerged. Aegon on Sunfire and Aemond on Vargar struck together from the sky. This was the ambush. The Red Queen was outnumbered and outmatched. The three dragons collided in a storm of fire and claws. Rhaenys fought fiercely, driving Melis into Sunfire with incredible force, nearly bringing the Golden Dragon down. But Vargar was ancient, fast and brutal. The older dragon clamped her jaws around Melis and dragged her to the earth. Melis fell crashing into the forest. Rhaenys died in the wreckage of her dragon, lost to the flames. Aegon was left badly burned by the same inferno, his body broken and shattered. The victory was a poisoned chalice. The Greens had killed a queen and a dragon, but their own king was crippled, perhaps permanently. The battle above Rook's Rest proved that even victory can cripple a king. With Aegon confined to his bed, his brother Aemond became the de facto commander of the Green War effort. The Blacks, mourning Rhaenys, marshalled their remaining strength in the Riverlands, where Daemon Targaryen held the strategic fortress of Harrenhal. The war, already brutal, continued its grinding descent. At Harrenhal, Daemon waited beneath the blackened towers of the cursed castle, gathering men and sending ravens across the Riverlands. His presence was a threat the Greens could not ignore. Yet Harrenhal was too vast to hold easily, and Daemon's campaign became a war of intimidation as much as conquest. Lords who had hesitated were forced to choose between the dragon above them and the armies gathering below. Aemond answered Daemon's challenge by taking Vargar into the Riverlands. The prince had become the most feared figure in the kingdom, with King Aegon unable to rule and Sir Criston Cole marching at the head of the royal host. Aemond wore the Iron Crown's authority without wearing the crown itself. He burned villages, punished black supporters, and sought the confrontation he believed would end the war. He wanted Daemon and Caraxes in the sky, dragon against dragon, uncle against nephew. But Daemon refused to give him the battle he wanted. Each time Aemond approached Harrenhal, Daemon was elsewhere. Each time Aemond left, Daemon returned. The two princes moved across the Riverlands like opposing storms, while the small folk suffered beneath their shadows. Fields were burned, granaries emptied, and villages that had little understanding of royal succession paid the price for the ambitions of dragonlords. For the Blacks, the death of Rhaenys had exposed a terrible weakness. They possessed dragons, but too few riders. Dragonstone was home to several great beasts whose riders had died, vanished, or never existed at all. The dragons remained chained or untamed, powerful weapons sitting beyond Rhaenyra's reach. It was then that Prince Jacaerys proposed a desperate solution. They would call for those with Valyrian blood, however distant, to come forward and attempt to claim the riderless dragons. The call spread through Dragonstone, Driftmark, and the ports of Blackwater Bay. Bastards, sailors, smiths, and common-born men came seeking fire and glory. They became known as the Dragonseeds. Many died in the attempt. Some were thrown from Dragonback. Others were burned, bitten, or torn apart before they ever touched the sky. Dragons did not care about noble names, and they did not offer their loyalty freely. Yet the gamble succeeded. Hugh Hammer claimed Vermithor, the massive bronze dragon once ridden by King Jaehaerys. Ulf the White mounted Silverwing, a gentle but formidable dragon of the old king's court. Adam of Hull, a bastard said to be of Velaryon blood, bonded with Seasmoke, the former dragon of Lionor Velaryon. Even Nettles, a mysterious young girl with no proven Valyrian heritage, found a way to win the trust of the wild dragon Sheepstealer. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted again. Rhaenyra had lost Rhaenys and Meleys, but now she had new riders and new dragons. The skies were becoming more dangerous than ever. Neither side could claim safety, because every fortress, army and fleet was vulnerable to fire from above. The war was no longer a contest between two rival claimants. It had become a struggle that consumed the realm itself. Kings were broken, queens were grieving, princes hunted one another through ruined lands, and ordinary people watched the heavens in fear. Wherever a dragon flew, death followed. The trap at Rook's Rest cost the Blacks a great dragon and a legendary rider. Princess Rhaenys was gone, and with her fell the most experienced dragon rider in the realm. The Black faction gathered on Dragonstone under a cloud of grief. Their numbers were shrinking, their options narrowing. They had more dragons than they had riders to control them. As losses mounted, the Blacks made a decision that would reshape the war. They sought riders for the unclaimed dragons of Dragonstone. The island held a wealth of beasts. The Bronze Fury, Vermithor, once the mount of King Jaehaerys I, Silverwing, the gentle queen dragon ridden by good Queen Alicent, and the wild ones, Sheepstealer, Grey Ghost, and the Cannibal. These were weapons of immense power, sitting idly in the stone halls of the Dragonmont. A proclamation was sent to the far corners of the Crownlands. Bastards and distant descendants of Valyria were invited to risk their lives for a chance at dragon riding. The promise was simple. Anyone with the blood of the dragon, no matter how low their station, would come to Dragonstone and attempt to claim a dragon. The realm called them the Dragonseeds. They came from the gutters of King's Landing, from the fishing villages of Crackclaw Point, from the smithies and the brothels. The greedy, the desperate, the ambitious, the mad, most died. The fires of the Dragonmont consumed the unworthy, but some did not die. This effort brought powerful new riders into Rhaenyra's cause, including Hugh Hammer and Ulf White. Hugh was a blacksmith's bastard, a giant of a man. He walked into the lair of the Bronze Fury, and he did not burn. Vermithor, the dragon of the old king, bowed his head to a common smith. Ulf White was his opposite in every way, a drunkard, a braggart, a man of no ambition beyond his next drink. He stumbled into the cave of Silverwing, and the Queen of Dragons accepted him out of some strange mercy. A man who could barely hold a sword now held the reins of a dragon. There were others. Adam of Hull, a shipwright's son, who may have carried the blood of the Velaryons, claimed the dragon Seasmoke, and the wild girl Nettles, who fed the sheep-stealing dragon until the beast grew to trust her, proved that the bond between rider and dragon could be forged through patience alone. The Dragonseeds gave Rhaenyra the riders she needed, but every desperate gamble carries a hidden cost. It also created a dangerous truth. Dragons can be claimed by people whose loyalty has never been tested. Hugh Hammer and Ulf White were given castles, titles, brides of noble blood. They were treated as lords and heroes, but they owed Rhaenyra nothing. They had been raised from nothing, given immense power over the course of a single day. Their loyalty was not rooted in conviction or oath. It was shallow, fed by opportunity and ambition. They were dragon lords without a master, and the war had not yet demanded their true allegiance. The emergence of the Dragonseeds shifted the balance of power back toward the Blacks, but it introduced a wild card into a game of intricate politics. The Greens had no answer to the sudden appearance of new dragons, but Rhaenyra had not yet learned whether the men who rode those dragons would stand by her side when the battle turned against them. The war was moving toward its most brutal phase, and the fate of the realm would soon rest on the choices of a blacksmith and a drunkard who held the fire of the gods in their hands. Their loyalty was untested. The battlefields ahead would reveal everything. The first test came not in a grand declaration, but in blood and smoke above the narrow sea. The Triarchy, allied with the Greens, struck at the Black Fleet in the Battle of the Gullet. Their ships burned, sailors drowned, and the war reached even the waters around Dragonstone. Young Prince Jacaerys Velaryon took to the sky on Vermax to defend his mother's cause. He fought bravely, but bravery could not save him. Jacaerys fell into the sea amid fire and wreckage. Another son of Rhaenyra claimed by the war. His death was a devastating blow. Jacaerys had been more than an heir. He had been Rhaenyra's most capable child, a diplomat, a commander, and the architect of the Dragonseed plan itself. The riders he had helped bring into the cause remained, but the prince, who understood how to use them, was gone. Yet even as Dragonstone mourned, the balance of the war continued to change. With more dragons in the sky, the Blacks at last possessed the strength to seize the capital. King's Landing, exhausted by shortages, fear, and the failures of Aegon II, could not withstand them. Rhaenyra entered the city and took the Iron Throne that had been denied to her for so long. For a brief moment, it seemed that victory had arrived. The Queen sat beneath the swords of her ancestors. The Greens had been driven from the capital. Aegon was wounded and missing. His brother Aemond had vanished into the Riverlands with Vahagar, leaving destruction in his path. But taking a throne was not the same as holding a kingdom. King's Landing was starving. The treasury was empty. The small folk who had cheered Rhaenyra's arrival soon found themselves burdened by new taxes and harsher demands. Every dragon needed food. Every army needed coin. Every lord wanted rewards for his loyalty. The queen, who had come to restore order, inherited only hunger, suspicion, and rage. And far from the capital, Hugh Hammer and Ulf White were about to reveal what their loyalty had truly been worth. At Tumbleton, the Dragonseeds were sent to help the Black Army defend a crucial town. Hugh rode Vermithor, the largest dragon in the war after Vargar. Ulf rode Silverwing, a creature once known for gentleness. Together, they held power enough to decide the battle before the first sword was drawn. Then they changed sides. Hugh Hammer and Ulf White turned their dragons against the very army that had raised them from obscurity. Tumbleton burned. Soldiers who had trusted them were roasted in their armor. The town was sacked with a cruelty that shocked even men hardened by years of civil war. The traitors joined the Greens, not because they believed in Aegon, but because they believed they deserved more. Hugh did not want a castle. He did not want a title. He wanted a crown. The betrayal at Tumbleton confirmed Rhaenyra's darkest fear. The Dragonseeds had given her strength, but they had also placed weapons beyond her control. Vermithor and Silverwing now served men whose hunger for power had no limit. The Blacks had gained dragons, only to discover that dragons could make traitors more dangerous than armies. And while kings, queens, and would-be kings argued over crowns, the common people of King's Landing were beginning to understand a terrible truth. No matter which side won, the dragons always demanded a price. The Dragonseeds had given the Blacks a deep breath of renewed air. Hugh Hammer, Ulf the White, Adam of Hull, and Nettles mounted their dragons and proved that the war was far from lost, that the crown still had teeth. As Rhaenyra's council debated their next move on Dragonstone, the city of King's Landing was failing its own king from within. The Greens were a faction in collapse. King Aegon II was a hollow shell, his body broken and scarred beyond recognition by the dragonfire at Rook's Rest. He was incapable of speech or rule, hidden behind heavy tapestries and the haze of milk of the poppy. The Queen Dowager Alicent found herself outmaneuvered by Larys Strong, the Lord Confessor, whose whispers grew louder in the absence of a king. And the Hand, Criston Cole, was trapped in the Riverlands, unable to return to defend the capital. Rhaenyra's advisors saw the opening at once. With Aegon wounded and the Green leadership divided, the Blacks moved against the capital. The plan was simple in its design, overwhelming in its execution. Corlys Velaryon commanded the fleet to throw a tight net around the gullet. Every escape route by sea was cut. No supply ships could break the cordon. No reinforcements could land. The city of King's Landing began to starve in earnest. The merchants grew silent. The fountains ran low. The smell of hunger crept through the streets, and and above the walls, Rhaenyra's dragons held command over the sky. Daemon on Caraxes made constant sorties, his dragons roar shaking the foundations of the Red Keep. Rhaenyra herself flew Syrax low over the city gates. The new Dragonseeds followed, their beasts darkening the horizon. The scorpions mounted on the city walls were useless against such numbers and such fury. The Velaryon fleet tightened pressure, while dragon riders made the city impossible to defend. The message was absolute: surrender or be consumed. Inside the walls, despair took hold. The gold cloaks were the first to break. Their commander abandoned his post, and the men turned their cloaks, opening the gates to the approaching black forces. The city chose to live. But before Rhaenyra could claim her prize, her half-brother slipped away. Larys Strong knew every stone, every shadow of the Red Keep. He took the shattered king, the young princess Rhaenyra, and a handful of loyal guards through a forgotten tunnel beneath the castle. They emerged outside the walls, cloaked and unknown, and vanished into the darkened countryside. Aegon escaped before Rhaenyra entered King's Landing. She entered the throne room, not in a storm of dragonfire, but in a procession of cold and deliberate triumph. There was no battle in the Great Hall, no last stand. The Iron Throne waited for her, silent and sharp, a monument of fused swords. She climbed its steep and jagged steps, cutting her hands and her legs on the blades of her ancestors. The throne drew her blood, as it had drawn the blood of so many before her. She sat. From the ruling seat of the Seven Kingdoms, Rhaenyra Targaryen surveyed her victory. It did not look like triumph. The treasury was bare. The crown was bankrupt. Every dragon of gold in the vaults had been melted down or spent by the Greens to fund the war. Rhaenyra could not pay the gold cloaks their wages. She could not feed the hungry city. She could not buy the loyalty of the great houses who still waited in silence. The small folk who had opened the gates were not her allies. They were starving, resentful, and they looked at her dragons with fear instead of reverence. They remembered the hunger her blockade had brought, and across the realm, her enemies still held the field. Aemon Targaryen and Vargar burned the Riverlands. Daemon Targaryen held the Reach. House Lannister and House Baratheon had not bent the knee, and Aegon was alive somewhere, waiting. Her victory was incomplete, because the crown came with an empty treasury, a hostile city, and enemies still in the field. The realm's delight had become a queen with no joy, no gold, and no peace. She sat the throne she had fought so long to claim, and the throne cut her. Her reign had begun. Yet the first days of her rule revealed how little a crown could accomplish without coin. Rhaenyra dismissed the old court, named new officers, and demanded that the lords of the realm declare for her at last. Some obeyed, many delayed. Others sent careful words of loyalty, while keeping their swords sheathed and their gates closed. The worst discovery came from the treasury. The gold had not simply been spent. Much of it had been carried away before the city fell, hidden on wagons and ships by men who understood that armies marched on silver as surely as they marched on bread. Rhaenyra had won the capital, but the wealth of the capital had escaped her grasp, so taxes rose. Fees were demanded at the gates. Merchants were pressed for coin. The people who had welcomed the opening of the city now found no relief from hunger, only new demands from a queen they barely knew. Each day the streets grew more bitter. Each night whispers spread through taverns and alleyways. They called her cruel. They called her false. They called her Maegor with teats. And within the Red Keep, grief deepened the hatred. Queen Helaena, broken by the murder of her son and the ruin of her family, became a symbol for all those who still mourned the Greens. Her sorrow was visible to the city. Her silence was louder than any proclamation from the Iron Throne. Rhaenyra possessed the crown, but she could not command love. The fall of King's Landing was not the end of the war. It was the beginning of the ugliest phase of the conflict. Rhaenyra Targaryen finally sat the Iron Throne, but the crown she placed upon her head was heavier than she could have imagined. The treasury was empty. Aegon II had seen to that before he fled. The people of King's Landing did not welcome their new queen with with open arms. They watched her with suspicion, and that suspicion curdled into violent rage. Rhaenyra and Aegon II both learned the same harsh lesson in those days. Claiming a throne is a matter of birthright, blood and luck. Holding it is an entirely different undertaking. The dance did not pause for the change of power. It continued through betrayals, mounting debts, shattered alliances, and the steady, inevitable march toward the deaths of nearly every major claimant. The tensions in the capital came to a head when the shepherd, a fanatical preacher, turned the small folk against the dragons themselves. The storming of the dragon pit was a riot of such violence that it shook the very foundation of Targaryen power. The common people of King's Landing, armed with nothing but spears and stones, dragged down 4 dragons from the dragon pit and tore them apart. The skies over Westeros grew quieter that day than they had been in centuries. The dragons had devastated Westeros. They had burned the Riverlands, shattered the Reach, and turned the seas at the gullet red with fire and blood. But the war was just as brutal to the dragons themselves. Syrax, Rhaenyra's own mount, was torn apart by a mob in the streets of King's Landing. By the time the war stumbled to its conclusion, the species was brought close to extinction. The power that had elevated the Targaryens above all others was dying alongside the very creatures that gave them that authority. Rhaenyra tried to return to Dragonstone, the seat of her strength for so long, but Aegon II was waiting for her. Sunfear, though wounded and scarred, was still alive. The dragon devoured Rhaenyra while her own half-brother watched. It was a brutal, intimate end to the woman who had been named heir to the realm. The last of the true black claimants was gone, but holding the throne brought Aegon no peace. He was poisoned in his own bed by his own supporters. Men who had decided the war had gone on too long. When the conflict finally ended, the Targaryens remained on the throne. Aegon III, a boy haunted by everything he had witnessed, was crowned king, but the family was broken. The power they had wielded for a century was shattered. Their age of dragons was over. The dance did not destroy the dynasty. It hollowed it out from the inside, leaving a weakened house that would never again command the uncontested fear and respect that had defined them since the doom of Valyria. The Iron Throne endured, but the roar of dragons that once made it truly formidable had fallen silent. In the years that followed, the realm tried to pretend that peace had returned. Lords bent the knee to a child king. Great houses counted their dead, rebuilt their castles, and searched for marriages that might mend the wounds left by war. Yet every treaty carried the memory of some burned field, some murdered prince, some dragon fallen from the sky. Aegon III became known as the Dragonbane, though he had not slain the dragons himself. He had simply lived long enough to see the last of them fade away. The sight of his mother being fed to sunfire had marked him forever. Dragons were not symbols of glory to him. They were monsters, reminders of terror, loss, and a family that had consumed itself in pursuit of a chair made of swords. The regents who ruled in his name inherited a kingdom exhausted by bloodshed. The Riverlands had been ravaged again and again. The North had sent men south who never came home. The Vale had been drawn into the struggle. The Reach had been divided by competing loyalties. The Iron Islands had taken advantage of the chaos, raiding coasts while the great lords fought over the crown. No corner of Westeros escaped untouched, and there was no clean victory for either side. The Blacks had lost Rhaenyra, Daemon, Viserys, Lucerys, Joffrey, and nearly every dragon of note. The Greens had lost Alicent's children, their strongest allies, and the cause they had fought so desperately to defend. In the end, the throne passed to Rhaenyra's son, but only after Aegon II had worn the crown. The war settled the question of succession in the cruelest possible way. It proved that law meant little when ambition had dragons behind it. The dance also changed how the great houses viewed the Targaryens. Before the war, the royal family seemed almost untouchable. Their blood was strange, their dragons were invincible, and their authority appeared absolute. Afterward, the mystique was gone. Westeros had watched dragon riders betray one another, Princes die in battle, queens flee mobs, and a king murdered by his own court. The rulers of the Seven Kingdoms were still Targaryens, but they no longer seemed like gods. That loss would echo through every generation that followed. Without dragons, the Iron Throne depended more heavily on marriages, alliances, gold, hostages, and the loyalty of powerful lords. A weak king could no longer summon a dragon to silence rebellion. A disputed succession could no longer be decided by fire from above. The dynasty remained powerful, but it had become vulnerable in a way it had not been since Aegon's conquest. There is a terrible irony at the heart of the Dance of the Dragons. Both factions claimed they were protecting the future of House Targaryen. Rhaenyra fought for the inheritance promised to her by her father. Aegon fought because others convinced him that his claim was stronger, safer, and more necessary. Each side believed surrender would bring ruin, so neither side surrendered. And because neither side could yield, the family nearly destroyed itself. By the time the smoke cleared, the throne had passed through the hands of kings and queens, warriors and children, pretenders and survivors. All that remained was a traumatized boy sitting beneath the blades of the Iron Throne, ruling a realm that had paid an unimaginable price for his crown. That is the true legacy of the dance, not simply who won or who wore the crown at the end. It is the warning written in the ashes of dragons and the graves of princes. Power can make a family mighty, but when power becomes more important than family, it can turn even a dynasty built on fire and blood into its own funeral pyre.